A young, blond man in uniform stands before a burning castle, admiring the flames. A man and woman in rich court attire and jewels yell at him from behind, saying he won't succeed. He turns to face them, arms spread wide, declaring it's already done and he will never be controlled by them again. He draws his sword, proclaiming he will soon control the country. He raises his sword and strikes, killing the man and woman before falling into darkness himself. He turns and walks away, never looking back, his gaze fixed on the abyss. To be continued appears on the phone screen. A woman holding the phone is frustrated that the story ends at the climax. A while later, she sits in her office, wearing a business suit, staring angrily at the transfer order she received. She is furious, complaining loudly about being transferred to the equipment management department. Her boss explains that she recently made another employee cry, and that employee even resigned. The woman shouts angrily that she did it to ensure the employee wouldn't dare to repeat the same mistake. The boss doesn't listen to her. His mind is made up, and he's ready to say goodbye. In the department, employees are gossiping about it, saying Machida was demoted because she was jealous of upper management and has always been an unpleasant person. Machida returns home and opens a bottle of wine to cope with her disappointment. Drinking doesn't help, and she ends up crying over the unfair treatment. She believes she was the best employee, but her stupid boss fired her over a small matter. Now her only comfort is her phone. She picks it up and opens her favorite book. Although it hasn't been updated yet, she's ready to reread the story, just to distract herself from her troubles. In real life, Machida despises a character in the book named Maria, who mistreats her stepson and is eventually killed by him. Machida feels that if she were there, she could have prevented it. Machida remembers everything she lost at work, and she can't help but shed tears as she reads. As she looks at the phone screen, she feels for the first time that there are similarities between her and Maria, and now she wants to figure out where they went wrong. In the morning, she wakes up with a headache from drinking too much the night before. She desperately needs water, so she moves her legs off the bed without opening her eyes. When she finally looks around, the first thing she sees is a young woman with white hair, dressed in an antique lace-trimmed shirt. Looking closer, Machida realizes it's not a portrait, but a mirror. She can't believe her eyes and starts touching her face. A pretty girl in a black, maid uniform and apron walks into the room, addressing Machida as Miss Maria. Machida looks at her hands anxiously, trying to understand what's happening around her. A little boy walks into the room holding a large plush kitten. The maid calls him Alfred, which greatly surprises Machida. Alfred and Maria, those are the names of the heroes from her favorite book. Machida is living in a luxurious mansion, almost like a castle, and she thinks something extraordinary has happened. She has walked into the novel she was reading. The novel is called The Road to Heroism and tells the story of how Prince Carlos overcomes countless challenges to become a true king. Machida has read all the completed chapters, but the story isn't over yet. It does, however, have a villain. The villain is a young man named Alfred Brown. Machida looks at an exquisite hand mirror in her hand and realizes that she has become the main villain's stepmother. She screams in horror, saying she fell asleep after drinking a bottle of wine and woke up in another world. Her expression frightens the maid. Machida notices the boy is still standing at the doorway, and she knows that in the future, this child will kill Maria. She thinks she might be able to prevent this from happening. First, she should smile and speak to the child in a gentle voice. Machida tries to do this, but no sound comes out. She has lost her voice in her agitation. Stepping on the hem of her long nightgown, she almost falls, knocking little Alfred to the ground. The child looks up at her in terror, his large eyes filled with tears. Machida wants to calm him down, to explain that she's lost her voice and just realized it, but she can't utter a word. The child runs away. All she can do is reach out to him. Machida tiredly collapses on the sofa, feeling that everything is over. She has made a terrible first impression on Alfred. If she can't talk to him, there's no way to clear up this misunderstanding. The scene from a book where Alfred kills Maria flashes before her eyes. She thinks that now everything will inevitably lead to this ending. Wang Hai now recalled the words of her boss and colleagues. No matter how outstanding her work was, she was too individualistic, too envious. Sitting in this room of classic luxury, she pondered how unfair it was that she was reborn, but stripped of any means to change the plot. A maid approached her with a tray holding a pitcher and a glass, surmising that Lady Maria must be tired, having just gotten married. These words gave Wang Hai something to think about. The maid called for a doctor to examine her ladyship. The doctor confirmed that the loss of voice was likely due to the stress of the recent marriage. Wang Hai remembered the book she had read, and now she was sure that Alfred's abuse began shortly after Maria married his father. If the story continued as the author wrote it, she would certainly be killed, Wang Hai thought. Losing her voice was the worst reward she could have received after being reborn, she thought as she finished the water in her glass. She decided not to rely on the plot of the book any longer. She made up her mind not to act according to the script set for her. As the maid brushed her hair, Wang Hai thought about how to interact with Alfred. Later, she noticed a lonely-looking boy walking in the wide hall. Wang Hai caught his attention. Alfred turned around, startled, clutching a plush cat. Wang Hai smiled and showed him a piece of paper with a question written on it, wanting to know how the child was feeling. Alfred dropped his toy on the carpet and started crying. He ran away, and Wang Hai didn't know how to stop him. She picked up the plush cat from the floor, frowning, wondering how she could befriend a child she couldn't even get close to. In the book, Maria was killed on Alfred's 16th birthday, and there was hardly any mention of his childhood. She figured that so little was known about him because he was the villain. The next time Wang Hai saw Alfred, the boy was coming downstairs. The child was very upset and looked like he was about to cry again. Wang Hai wanted to approach Alfred, but she stepped on her dress again. She fell to the floor, dropping the toy she was about to return to the boy. As Alfred looked at her in alarm, Wang Hai's tears flowed. Suddenly, they both heard someone shouting and turned towards the source of the sound. The Duke had returned. He was a tall, handsome man. As he entered the hall, all the servants lined up to greet him. Wang Hai recognized this character. This man was Zahar, Maria's husband. He was her husband now, and she couldn't contain her emotions, as this was enough to make her not regret her transformation. The Duke stood before her and roughly asked why she was sitting on the floor. He said it was unseemly, a look of disdain on his face. Wang Hai couldn't believe that the man wouldn't even help his wife up when she had fallen and couldn't get up. Zahar walked away with someone, talking about business. Wang Hai got up by herself, furious. Zahar didn't care at all about what was happening behind him. Suddenly, the Duke noticed his son and called him over, saying it was time for the 5-year-old to stop playing with plush toys. Alfred turned around, still clutching the worn-out cat. The Duke told him that in the future, Alfred would have to serve the king like his father and shouldn't waste his time on such frivolous things. Father and son looked at each other, the man looking displeased, while the child's face showed disappointment and fear. The Duke roughly grabbed his son's arm, dragging him away and announcing it was time for sword practice. Wang Hai saw how pained Alfred's face became. She remembered her own father telling his friends that Wang Hai couldn't go out and play with them because she had to study, while Wang Hai herself looked hopefully at his back. She watched from a window as other children played happily with a ball in the street. She wanted to go and play with them too. So, she caught up with Zahar and Alfred and put her hand on the boy's shoulder. The Duke stopped and angrily asked what she wanted. Wang Hai looked at Zahar, feeling that Alfred didn't want to study now, but wanted to play. The boy was very surprised by the hand on his shoulder. Zahar angrily asked what this meant, which made Wang Hai uneasy because she still couldn't speak and didn't understand why her husband hadn't noticed this yet. Wang Hai opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She wanted to ask the Duke if he truly hated his son. Zahar, thinking his wife was just mocking him, strode away, still holding his son's hand tightly. Alfred looked back at his stepmother. He remembered a time when people were kind to him. His mother asked him not to tell anyone about his special gift, the ability to hear the heart of anyone he touched. This was a secret between him and his mother, one he couldn't even tell his father. Alfred promised to keep it. His mother had given him this ability, but now he didn't need it anymore. When Maria placed her hand on Alfred's shoulder, he felt her heart. Alfred felt sad because his father was angry with him. The boy remembered a completely different feeling in Maria's heart the last time she touched him. That day, he and his father were standing in the ornately decorated hall, and a beautiful lady, dressed in an elegant traveling suit and a purple hat, was looking at him. The boy thought that this lady would become his new mother. The lady said, "It was a great honor to become the Duchess." Alfred's father said he felt the same, but his expression remained cold. The lady stepped forward to hug the Duke, saying that as his future wife, she had many things to discuss with him. Alfred hid behind his father, but the strange lady still noticed him. She smiled and said it was a pleasure to have such a lovely son. She extended her lace-gloved hand and said it was nice to meet him. When her hand touched the boy's cheek, he felt her dark thoughts. She thought Alfred would be a lot of trouble. Now his father was walking Alfred down the hallway. The boy thought about his stepmother's behavior today and found it strange that this was the same woman who only considered him a nuisance. Wang Hai sat in a chair, immersed in sad memories. She grew up in a very strict household with a curfew, and her father wouldn't let her go out with friends. After Wang Hai graduated from university, her father began to look for a husband for her. He often said that a woman's true happiness was to marry young and have children. When Wang Hai dared to object and declare that she would never marry, he yelled at her, believing she had to obey. Wang Hai looked at him silently and made an important decision at that moment. She left home to find her own happiness. She left with only a suitcase and a small bag and never returned. Now she found herself married to a man who reminded her of her father, and that was the worst thing. She recalled the brief conversation with Zahar. Her husband's attitude really annoyed her. Looking at Alfred, Wang Hai felt like she was seeing that unfortunate girl again. She didn't understand why Zahar was teaching a 5-year-old self-defense. Zahar told her not to cause trouble, which really angered her. The Duke ordered her not to interfere, so Wang Hai knew she had to remain silent. Zahar and Alfred went to the courtyard for fencing practice. Wang Hai also came, hiding behind the wall and secretly watching the training. She didn't quite understand why she was here either. The Duke was teaching Alfred how to practice hitting a dummy with a wooden sword. Curiosity had brought Wang Hai here, but now she wanted to make sure the boy was all right. Alfred brought his plush kitten to the lesson and kept looking at it while he practiced. Zahar told his son that he was warming up for too long. The Duke scolded sternly that Alfred had to start training immediately. Alfred looked distressed. He stroked his toy kitten and asked for a little more time. The boy picked up his wooden sword and started hitting the dummy while his father carefully observed his movements. Zahar ordered his son to speed up. The boy couldn't cope, dropped his sword, and fell to the ground. The Duke frowned and said they had to continue. Alfred picked up his sword again, and his father continued to point out the problems. Every time Alfred fell, the Duke would get angry and order him to get up quickly. Wang Hai watched this scene, and she really didn't like what was happening. Her heart ached, so she resolutely rushed towards Zahar and Alfred. She stood in front of the Duke, arms spread wide, shielding the child with her body. Zahar said that if Maria had something to say, she should just say it. Wang Hai thought about how she had become the complete opposite of who she was before her transformation. Alfred touched his stepmother and said loudly that she couldn't speak. Wang Hai was surprised that the child had helped her out. Zahar thought Maria was pretending to be mute on purpose, but he didn't understand why anyone would do that. Wang Hai looked at him, feeling a mix of emotions, because Zahar had only just now realized her voice problem. The Duke noted that his wife could speak normally yesterday. During their conversation, another person approached them. The Duke's aide approached and explained that Maria was indeed temporarily unable to speak. He handed Zahar a piece of paper with the doctor's description of the Duchess's symptoms. The young man turned to Wang Hai and introduced himself. His name was Melio, and he bowed, saying this was their first meeting. Melio handed the Duchess a pen and paper. Wang Hai was surprised by the attentiveness of her husband's aide. Now she could write down that she had lost her voice for unknown reasons and would try not to cause any trouble for her husband. Zahar looked at his wife with sharp eyes. For the first time, Wang Hai realized that Alfred becoming the way he was in the book wasn't just because of Maria, but also because of his overly strict father. Maria and Zahar shared the same fate, both destined to be killed by Alfred, but Wang Hai hoped they could escape together. Zahar said she had caused him enough trouble and not to get in his way from now on. Wang Hai realized he still saw her as a burden. The Duke turned to his son and announced the end of training. Alfred stared at his father as he added that he should slack off less. Zahar turned and left, while Wang Hai thought that only she could save everyone. Back at the castle, Melio caught up with the Duke. Zahar didn't believe Maria had suddenly lost her voice. He suspected his wife was up to something. Melio suggested bringing the doctor's note as proof. Zahar ordered his aide to keep a close eye on Maria, as she was known for her bad temper. Melio said he would take care of everything. The aide worried that even at home, the Duke couldn't fully relax. Maria and I married because of the king's orders. Meanwhile, Alfred was sitting on his bed, hugging a toy. The maid entered with a tray of food, smiling as she said the young master must be tired from training and might want a snack. Seeing Alfred crying, the maid asked if he was hurt. She was worried and wanted to call the doctor immediately. Alfred kept crying, feeling like he wanted to run away from here. But after a moment, he wanted to stay even more. Staying seemed like the best option, especially to be with his mother. Thinking of this, Alfred hugged his cloth kitten tighter. There was a knock on the door. Alfred told him to come in. It was his stepmother, Maria. Alfred stared at her in complete surprise. Maria smiled, carrying a first aid kit. Alfred jumped off the bed, insisting he was fine, that it didn't hurt at all. But his knee did hurt, and he couldn't pretend, almost falling to his knees in tears. Maria sat on the floor, saying the scrape looked painful and needed to be treated immediately. As she tended to Alfred's knee, he could read her emotions again, now staring at his stepmother with wide eyes. Maria warned that the medicine might sting a little, but only for a few seconds. She treated the scrape with a special solution. Alfred heard her thinking that it was hard for him too. Maria thought this kind of training was too harsh for a 5-year-old. Maria's expression was sympathetic. She was thinking about how hard Alfred must be trying. Through his tears, Alfred gave her a bright smile. Wang Hai noticed how rarely joy appeared on the child's face. Maria was wrapping the final bandage, and Alfred realized she thought he was an interesting child. It was surprising to Alfred that someone found him interesting. Other children who wanted to play with him said he was boring. Alfred laukit. It was the first time someone had called him interesting. Maria packed up her tools and medicine. She thought that this overly complicated training would continue, and she didn't know how else she could help Alfred. Alfred looked at her with wide eyes and said he was a good boy, so he would do his best. Wang Hai thought that the child saying so himself changed a lot of things. She picked up the first aid kit, preparing to leave. Alfred grabbed her skirt, stopping her from going. He asked if she was leaving. Wang Hai wanted to answer, but still couldn't speak. She covered her mouth with her hand, thinking this was all so heartwarming. The boy looked at her trustingly. He thanked her for her help. Wang Hai said goodbye and left the room. Alfred told his kitten that he was surprised Maria was so nice to him. He had always thought his stepmother was a bad person. Now Alfred really wanted to know what kind of person she really was. Meanwhile, the Duke was in his office, preparing to hear Melio's report. His aide told him that the Duchess and his son were getting along well. Melio noted that it had been a long time since he had seen Alfred smile so genuinely. The Duke's face remained cold and serious. Melio turned away to hide a smile, thinking how much the father and son resembled each other. Melio asked if it wasn't good that the Duchess and Alfred had become friends. Zahar pointed out that Maria shouldn't be underestimated. Melio said that everyone knew how Maria used to mock girls who were different from her. Maria, from the Marquis Dane family, had her marriage to Zahar arranged to keep an eye on his family. The king suspected the Marquis was the main instigator of the recent rebellion. Zahar suspected his wife was only pretending to be submissive and voiceless, and it was all some sort of political game. At dinner, Hope was amazed by the abundance of delicious food on the table. She looked at the seat opposite her, thinking that Alfred would soon be sitting there. But instead of the boy, Zahar appeared. The Duke and Duchess were supposed to dine facing each other. They stared at each other in silence, and Hope thought that as long as she didn't do anything stupid, everything would be all right. The Duke was drinking wine, and looking at him, Hope wanted a drink too. She gazed at the Duke, thinking about how much she loved good wine. He noticed the look. Zahar looked at his wife and asked if Maria wanted some red wine. Hope was surprised by her husband's consideration. It felt good. She watched with pleasure as the maid poured the wine. The aroma of this wine was better than any she had ever tasted in her own world. Watching Maria enjoying the wine, Zahar noticed that she seemed like a completely different person since their marriage. Hope froze in surprise, looking at her husband with confusion. Zahar said he remembered Maria wasn't supposed to drink alcohol. Hope realized she had made a mistake. This slip-up scared her immensely. The Duke put down his glass and asked her directly who she was. Hope simply forgot that Maria couldn't drink. Zahar frowned, staring at Maria. Hope was afraid he had discovered the secret of her rebirth, but Zahar guessed that Maria might have a split personality. Hope didn't understand what he was talking about. Zahar said thoughtfully that people with dual personalities would behave very differently. Their tastes and preferences would change, and this could explain the recent anomalies. Hope felt she had temporarily escaped danger, but she was still very nervous, and this only made the Duke more suspicious. She found it strange that Zahar hadn't realized that a completely different person was now in his wife's body. Yet he could think of the possibility of split personality. Hope knew she had to be vigilant, because even having read the novel, she still didn't know all the details of Maria's life before she took over her body. The Duke rose from his chair and thoughtfully scanned the tableware. He took a few steps towards his wife and said she was a big liar. He leaned closer to her and picked up a knife from the table. Zahar pressed the blade against Maria's throat, asking without removing the blade if someone had replaced this woman. Hope was terrified but still couldn't speak. Zahar thought the threat would make Maria speak immediately, but his plan failed and she remained silent. The Duke spoke. He didn't know what this woman was planning to do. He declared that if he found out she was a liar or an imposter, he would kill her. Zahar released his wife, put down the knife, and warned Maria to be careful. Hope was scared, thinking that if things continued like this, the Duke would kill her before Alfred had a chance. Back in her room, she decided she had to take urgent action to address Zahar's suspicions, or her life would be in danger. Hope remembered reading that Maria was from the Dane family, who were the prime suspects in the recent rebellion. Essentially, by marrying, Maria became a hostage. Hope threw herself on the sofa, her head pounding. Suddenly, she heard a noise and turned to see Alfred standing hesitantly at her door. "Hello," the boy said, waving at her. Hope was happy to see him, still unable to believe that this child might kill her in the future. The Duchess's real problem now was Zahar. After the knife incident at dinner, she needed to avoid him. Hope, smiling, gestured for Alfred to come closer and was quite surprised when the boy left without explaining why he had come. At night, sitting in front of the mirror, Hope saw Alfred standing at the door again. The boy just stared at her through the half-open door. Hope was confused by his behavior. She cautiously turned to Alfred. This time, everything had to go smoothly. The child seemed to want to say something, but Hope couldn't ask him what he wanted to say. Alfred waved good night to her with the paw of his toy kitten. Before the boy darted away, Hope once again failed to react or approach the door. She wondered if he was simply saying good night or if he was worried about her. She thought Alfred was really sweet. Alfred walked home talking to his kitten, telling it how happy he was that he'd said good night to Maria, something he wouldn't have dared to do without his toy friend. Wang Hai lay in bed, thinking about why Zahar just didn't understand his son. And, for the first time, she thought about how others perceived her. In her past life, she had always been critical, yelling, and not even letting others respond. Now she regretted acting that way. These memories disturbed her. The next day arrived, and the castle looked magnificent in the morning light. Wang Hai woke up, got out of bed barefoot, and felt something strange touch her. Only because she had lost her voice did she not scream. Up until now, she thought she could handle all the problems, but the turning point had come, and Wang Hai was completely terrified. Alfred stood at the doorway and saw how scared she was, but the boy didn't quite understand what frightened her so much. On the floor by Maria's bed sat a small mouse, which was the cause of her panic. The mouse crawled over to the pen Maria used to write letters. It sniffed it. Wang Hai waved her hands, trying to call for help, but she couldn't run out of the room to get someone because the mouse was between her and the door. Wang Hai noticed Alfred, but she could neither warn him of the danger nor make him run away. The boy entered the room and said good morning to his stepmother. Maria continued to silently scream in panic. Alfred approached the bed and asked her what was wrong. The boy thought it was strange that Maria was afraid of the mouse, but she was genuinely terrified. Alfred thought the mouse was cute, not scary at all. He smiled at Maria and told her she could leave the mouse to him. He reached out to pick up the mouse, telling it not to scare Miss Maria. Alfred carried the mouse out of the room and released it far from the doorway. Wang Hai was surprised that the boy could pick up a mouse with his bare hands, and that he had helped her. Alfred returned to assure her that everything was all right now. Wang Hai quickly grabbed his hand, and he felt her gratitude. She picked up a piece of paper and wrote thank you. Alfred smilet happily. Wang Hai wrote that Alfred could come to her with his problems, and she suggested they help each other. Alfred remembered reading in a picture book that friends help each other in times of trouble. He told Maria about this and asked if that meant they were going to be friends. Wang Hai pondered his words. She wrote a response on the paper, thinking that things were moving too fast, but it was a good thing the plot was progressing. She was glad to be one step closer to preventing the disaster. Wang Hai smiled at the boy and decided to be his friend. This made Alfred incredibly excited, and he said he was really happy about this friendship. Then Alfred became serious and said he needed Maria's help. They went together to the alley in front of the castle. Alfred confessed that when he played hide-and-seek with the other children, he was always the first one caught, and when he chased others, he often fell, so the other children looked down on him. Now he wanted to learn how to run fast. Alfred thought Maria had a fast pace. This surprised her. Alfred mentioned that when he practiced fencing with his father, Maria had run over to them very quickly. Wang Hai smiled and agreed to help her stepson train, and she specifically put on pants and a shirt. She asked Alfred to show her how fast he could run. Alfred started running, and Wang Hai immediately noticed he was very slow, so slow that she could overtake him by walking. After a few steps, the boy tripped, which startled Wang Hai. She rushed to the child's side to make sure he wasn't hurt. Alfred was upset, and Wang Hai thought they would need a lot of training. Wang Hai felt a surge of excitement. There was no turning back now. She decided to train her stepson not only in running, but in other exercises as well. In addition to that, she picked up a wooden sword. She wrote Alfred a list of exercises, some for building endurance, and some for increasing arm strength. The boy was intimidated by the sheer number of tasks on the list and wasn't sure he could complete them. Wang Hai and Alfred ran in the alley. Emilio saw them training together. He had to tell the Duke about this. The Duke was surprised by the news his aide brought him. He wondered what his wife was planning. The Duke decided to see for himself. After instructing her stepson, Maria was climbing the stairs, and the exhausted Alfred struggled to keep up. The boy stumbled on the steps and began to fall down the steep staircase. Wang Hai, horrified, tried to grab his hand, but she was too late to catch Alfred. A pair of man's hands caught the boy at the bottom of the stairs. Fortunately, he was unharmed and looked back at his father, who had arrived just in time. Wang Hai breathed a sigh of relief. Zahar began yelling at her, accusing her of pushing Alfred down the stairs. Wang Hai couldn't believe her ears. Alfred interjected that Maria hadn't done anything wrong, but Zahar roughly cut him off. The Duke declared that he forbade Maria from going near his son, and that next time, he wouldn't be so lenient. That evening, Wang Hai angrily sipped wine in her bedroom, shocked by her husband's unfair treatment, which couldn't even be explained by his concern for his son. Wang Hai realized that nothing had changed. Zahar continued to behave just like her father, pressuring Alfred without regard for the child's feelings. Zahar and Wang Hai's father were very similar. Lost in these thoughts, Wang Hai fell asleep on the sofa, not even making it to her bed. The next morning, a knock on the door woke her. It was Alfred. He came to ask Maria to train with him. Wang Hai had to refuse him, which made her very sad. Alfred noticed her mood and asked her what was wrong. He approached her and touched her hand. Wang Hai thought about how she had stopped the training mainly for his own good. Alfred took her hand and began to plead, promising he would try harder. Alfred really wanted Maria to teach him everything. Wang Hai felt very sorry for him. She hugged the boy and led him to the door. As he left, Alfred kept looking back, determined not to give up. Wang Hai watched him go, feeling very sad. She knew she had made the right decision. Wang Hai knew Alfred wanted to continue training with all his heart, but Zahar was completely against his wife interacting with his stepson. After some thought, Wang Hai came up with an idea. Wang Hai dressed herself neatly and resolutely walked into the Duke's office to talk to him. She wrote on a piece of paper that she had promised to teach Alfred how to run faster. She asked for permission to continue the training and promised not to put the child in danger again. She wrote that she knew Zahar would refuse her request, so she suggested that someone the Duke trusted could accompany them while she and Alfred were together. Seeing Alfred's expression made Wang Hai want to fulfill all his wishes. Alfred rushed into the office during the conversation. He raised his hand to get the adults' attention because he wanted to tell a story. The adults looked at the little boy, waiting for him to speak. Alfred said that Maria hadn't done anything wrong and that she had tried to help him when he almost fell down the stairs. The boy clutched Wang Hai's skirt and said they were friends. And friends, Alfred explained, help each other in times of trouble. He wanted to learn many things, but just couldn't grasp them, and then Maria helped him. Alfred was thinking about how he could learn to run fast, so he wanted Maria to continue training him. Wang Hai held up the paper with her suggestion written on it again. The Duke crossed his arms and asked who could take on such a responsibility. Zahar seemed oblivious to the fact that everyone was looking at him. Alfred excitedly exclaimed that he wanted his dad to join their training. Although reluctant, Zahar had to comply with his wife's and son's wishes. The Duke sat on a chair outside, nervously fiddling with his shirt collar, not understanding why he had to waste his time on such nonsense. At that moment, Alfred ran with his arms outstretched along the path while Maria timed him. Alfred retorted that it wasn't nonsense at all. Maria explained that he needed to get a feel for balance first, which was a warm-up exercise and very helpful for running fast. Wang Hai could have shared a lot about training, but even if she could speak, Zahar wouldn't understand. The Duke got tired of sitting in the garden and told Emilio to watch Maria and Alfred. The boy snuggled up to his stepmother and watched his father leave. The Duke announced he was going back to work and left without even looking back. Alfred was upset, and Wang Hai felt that Zahar was being too heartless towards his son. The boy was almost in tears, thinking that his father really hated him. Seeing his distress and not knowing how to comfort him, Wang Hai sat next to the child and put her hand on his shoulder. Alfred smiled at her and said he wanted to continue the lesson. He ran ahead again, while Wang Hai looked at him thoughtfully. She tried to figure out why the Duke was so harsh with his son, but then thought that it wasn't her place to judge. Wang Hai felt that Zahar should be the one most concerned about the child's feelings. Soon, she noticed Alfred was getting tired, and his breathing was becoming labored. She suggested they take a break, so they spread a blanket on the grass and took out the tray with food and tea. Wang Hai waved to Milio, who was watching them, and he said he was fine and didn't need any tea. Alfred, holding a cup, smiled at the Duke's aide. Before pouring the tea, Milio asked what was in it. Wang Hai felt that the young man seemed to have noticed something. Milio noticed Maria's pale face and asked if she disliked the scent. This question troubled Wang Hai. She thought that rosemary was indeed good for relieving fatigue, while Alfred looked at her, trying to read her mind. Wang Hai had brewed the tea herself, but to avoid further suspicion, she didn't want to admit it. Alfred nudged Maria and said the tea had that scent because it contained rosemary. Wang Hai was surprised by the boy's words. Milio laughed. He hadn't expected Maria to know so much about tea and herbs. While pouring tea into the cup, Milio confirmed that it was indeed a good way to relieve fatigue. Wang Hai thanked Alfred for his help and asked him on a note how he knew there was rosemary in the tea. She guessed the boy had a keen sense of smell. Alfred said the maid had told him that Maria had specially brewed this tea to help him recover from his fatigue more quickly. Wang Hai wondered if magic truly existed in this world. Soon, Wang Hai would face a new challenge, despite having been notified a few days prior. The Duchess, very nervous, pinned a black rose to her crimson dress in preparation for the ball. The dress was very puffy, and in addition to that, Wang Hai wore lace gloves and a delicate necklace. Another black rose was woven into her light-colored hair, making her curious about how she would look wearing all of this. Alfred, dressed in festive attire, was amazed by Maria's beauty. The Duke was also waiting for Wang Hai to go to the royal evening party together. Wang Hai held her stepson's hand. The boy was in a cheerful mood. The Duke walked ahead, as usual, without looking back at his wife and son. In a shining hall, elegantly dressed ladies and gentlemen were dancing. Zahar, Maria, and Alfred stood in front of a door. The door was guarded. Zahar turned to his wife and told her to follow him, not missing a single step. Wang Hai thought that since she couldn't speak anyway, she had no other choice. This was the royal palace, and dancing couples were twirling in front of the throne. Wang Hai was stunned by the luxurious scene before her. A red-haired man, wearing a crown, sat on the throne, and a red-haired boy sat on the small throne beside him. Wang Hai looked at the king. Then she turned her gaze to his son, Prince Carlos, whom she immediately recognized. Wang Hai saw the protagonist of her favorite book with her own eyes. She couldn't believe she had actually met Prince Carlos. Zahar thanked the king for inviting them to tonight's event. The king smiled and said he was grateful for the guest's arrival. He asked the Duchess how her married life was and said he thought Zahar was a good man, just a little aloof. Wang Hai bowed, but was still unable to answer any questions. Zahar explained that his wife couldn't speak for unknown reasons. The king noticed that Zahar's mood had suddenly changed. Wang Hai looked anxiously at the king, thinking that everyone knew her marriage was arranged by his order for political reasons. The king turned his attention to Alfred, commenting that he had grown taller since their last meeting. The boy felt shy and hid behind Wang Hai. Zahar scolded him, but Wang Hai gave the boy an encouraging smile. The king watched this scene thoughtfully, stroking his beard. The red-haired prince jumped down from the throne, excitedly saying how much he missed Zahar and couldn't wait to see him again. Carlos wanted Zahar to tell him stories of strategy and tactics again. The Duke was also happy to see him, and they smiled at each other. The king said he had completely forgotten how much Carlos liked Zahar, but he explained to his son that he and Zahar had many important matters to deal with today, so Carlos had better play with Alfred. The prince clearly didn't like his father's instructions, while Alfred looked on expectantly. Carlos didn't even glance at Alfred, while his father expressed his belief that children would have more fun than adults. The prince wanted to chat with Zahar, but the king said that could wait for another day. Carlos took the initiative, told a bewildered Alfred to follow him, and strode off. Alfred eagerly followed behind the prince, and the two boys headed towards the fountain garden where other children were already waiting. Two boys and a girl approached Carlos, suggesting they play hide and seek. Alfred smiled and waved to them. The children weren't happy to see him there, and one boy called him bedside table, the same one who used to tease Alfred about falling. Alfred excitedly declared he had learned, but the prince looked at him skeptically. The other children didn't believe him either. Then Carlos said Alfred would beat it in their game. The children scattered, and one boy ran past him, putting his hand behind his head and looking back at Alfred mockingly. Alfred realized this was going to be easy. Alfred easily caught up to him and tapped him on the back. The boy was utterly surprised that Alfred had caught him so quickly. Alfred said he was much faster now. All the children looked at him skeptically, as they considered him slower than a turtle. Alfred ran and explained that he had just been training a lot. The boy was truly enjoying being able to run as fast as the others. Prince Carlos looked at Alfred with a strange expression and then suddenly tripped him. Alfred fell hard to the ground. Carlos walked over, feigning a casual smile, and extended his hand, asking him why he had fallen. Alfred thanked the prince and took the offered hand. The moment he touched it, he felt a wave of hatred coming from Carlos, which horrified him. Meanwhile, Wanhai was trying to cope with the excitement of meeting the prince and the king. She wanted to get some wine, but a man's hand grabbed her elbow. Zahar was standing beside her, not letting go, blocking her way. The Duke said that since she couldn't speak, Maria shouldn't stray too far from him. Wanhai didn't understand why he was so worried about her. Zahar offered his arm to Maria. Wanhai tried to figure out if the gesture meant she should take his arm. She quickly thought that as a married couple, it should look normal, and she liked the idea. Her hand, clad in a lace glove, rested on the Duke's arm. Zahar turned and said he hated doing this too, which was unpleasant to hear. The Duke and Duchess walked through the hall arm in arm, not even looking at each other. The people around them gossiped about them being a newlywed couple in a political marriage, calling Maria the villain of the Dane family. Wanhai glared angrily at the gossipers, but they didn't care that she could hear them. A group of ladies suddenly called out to Maria. They were young, cheerful, and well-dressed girls, happy to see their friend, only she didn't recognize a single face. They smiled and said Maria and Zahar looked good together. Zahar didn't like them saying that, while Wanhai worried that she didn't know the names of these friends. One of the girls said that no one at the banquet tonight was more beautiful than Maria and Zahar. Maria was surrounded by the girls' chatter, laughter, and flattery. Zahar said he had something to attend to and quickly left, leaving his wife alone, despite repeatedly telling her not to leave his side. Maria's friends loudly praised the jewelry she was wearing. They said they were jealous and wanted to wear similar jewelry, their faces beaming with smiles. Wanhai felt they were hinting for gifts, and she even imagined Maria, with the same smile, scattering jewels into eagerly outstretched hands. But she wasn't going to give them any jewels, despite the expectation gleaming in their eyes. Finally, she decided to give one of her friends a gift. A small candy in yellow wrapping landed in the hand of the girl wearing black gloves. Wanhai hurried away from Maria's friends, unsure of what would happen next. As she walked alone through the glittering ballroom, Zahar noticed that Maria had even changed the way she interacted with her friends. The band began to play a new dance tune. The king cheerfully urged the guests to enjoy the evening. The nobles waltzed gracefully. The king asked Zahar why he wasn't dancing with his wife. Zahar couldn't refuse the king's command and bowed in acceptance. The Duke found Maria alone with a wine glass in her hand and extended his hand to invite her to dance. Zahar explained that it was a royal command that could not be disobeyed. They began to dance, and Wanhai felt nervous. Zahar mentioned he had often heard that Maria was an excellent dancer, but he hadn't noticed it himself. Wanhai recalled how in her past life, she used to go to ballroom dancing classes after work. A spark of angry fire lit in her eyes, and she showcased the first dance step she had learned, completely baffling her partner. The king watched her with growing curiosity. Zahar told Maria not to make any moves without his permission. He said a lady should just carefully follow her partner, but Wanhai wasn't about to listen to him. She continued to dance in a way completely unfamiliar to this world. Wanhai leaned back so far that Zahar had to catch her. Her shoes, even her ankles, were visible beneath the hem of her lace dress, drawing glances from those around them. Zahar noted that the vigorous dance steps were neither suited to the music nor befitting their image, especially in Maria's presence. Annoyed that the Duke didn't appreciate her dancing, Wanhai stepped on his foot with her sharp heel. She then pulled away from Zahar and curtsied in apology. Afterward, Wanhai left the ballroom and went into the garden. A chill ran through her. Then she heard a commotion. Guards were helping Prince Carlos up from the ground. Opposite him stood another child, Alfred, looking frightened, almost in tears. As Carlos extended a hand to help Alfred up, Wanhai felt a pang of worry for the boy. Although the prince offered his hand with a smile, Alfred sensed hatred. Carlos particularly loathed him, and this hurt Alfred deeply. The prince thought Alfred was nothing like Zahar. Someone like him couldn't possibly be the Duke's biological son. Carlos believed all of Alfred's flaws came from his deceased mother. These thoughts made Alfred abruptly pull his hand back and shove him. Alfred's shove sent Prince Carlos tumbling back to the ground. The prince shouted angrily at him. Carlos loudly demanded to know why Alfred had pushed him, especially when he was offering to help. Alfred cried, thinking about the thoughts he'd caught when he'd touched the prince's palm. Guards came running and helped Carlos to his feet. The other children watched anxiously. Maria emerged from where she'd been hiding and went straight to her stepson, focused solely on him and his tears. She wanted to ask him what had happened, who had upset him. Seeing his stepmother, Alfred cried even harder. The boy rushed to Maria, and she embraced him. Carlos explained that they had been playing, and Alfred had fallen, and when the prince tried to help him up, he had pushed him away. Another boy immediately confirmed that this was exactly how it had happened. Alfred sensed Maria, wondering if the prince was telling the truth. The boy pulled away from his stepmother's embrace. He ran off, not looking back as he ran, crying in anguish, his hands covering his face. He only stopped at the fountain, staring for a long time at his sad reflection in the water. He sat on the edge of the fountain, lost in thought, unable to sort out his true feelings. It began to rain. A hand in a lace glove opened an umbrella over Alfred's head. Maria sat beside him on the edge of the fountain, holding the umbrella over them both. She thought that he must have a very important reason for not explaining to anyone. Alfred looked at her, listening to her thoughts. Maria believed he had the right to keep his secrets. Sitting beside him, her arm around his shoulders, she thought that she would always be on his side. Alfred didn't look at his stepmother, but admitted that he had indeed pushed Carlos, not because he wanted to. Maria wrote on a piece of paper, asking him why he had done it. The boy looked distressed and said he was truly sorry. Maria pulled her stepson close and hugged him. They returned to the palace, and Alfred bowed and apologized to the prince. Alfred declared that he would grow up to be an upright man like his father, and he planned to be as outstanding as his mother, and he hoped the prince would understand that. Carlos snorted and replied that it was encouraging. Alfred asked the prince not to be angry with him anymore, which provoked a strange reaction. The Duke approached them and called out sternly to his son. He asked Alfred what he had done. Alfred was terrified, and Wang Hai was very worried. Zahar continued to yell at his son, demanding to know what had happened. Alfred blushed and trembled before his father. Wang Hai decisively stepped forward, placing herself between her stepson and Zahar. Zahar grabbed her elbow and pushed her aside, telling her to leave, as he didn't have time to deal with her as well. The Duke asked Alfred why he had pushed His Highness Carlos. Alfred continued to tremble before his father, not even daring to meet his gaze, and said nothing. Zahar bowed to Carlos and apologized for his son's rudeness, promising to discipline Alfred severely. The prince turned his head away and replied that he wasn't angry at all, and he was sure Alfred hadn't meant to do it. The Duke thanked Carlos for his understanding and took his leave. Upon returning home, Zahar shoved Alfred into the punishment room. The Duke said that Alfred didn't deserve to be a member of the Brown family, so he was to stay there and reflect. The boy was heartbroken and begged his father for forgiveness. Zahar closed the door and walked away without looking back. Maria and Emilio were waiting for the Duke in the hall. Maria was furious and stared directly at her husband. Zahar explained that this was a necessary part of his upbringing and demanded that she not interfere. Maria thought there must be a reason for Alfred's actions. If his father understood him better, the boy wouldn't be alone in the cold dungeon now. Alfred shivered in the cold, thinking his father must hate him. Suddenly, he noticed someone at the barred window of the door. It was Maria. Alfred asked in surprise, "What are you doing here?" Maria reached through the bars and offered the boy a piece of bread. Alfred brought a chair over to the door so he could reach the window. He climbed onto the chair and gratefully accepted the food. As he took the bread, he brushed Maria's hand and sensed that she intended to stay with him all night, so he wouldn't be alone. Alfred told her she didn't have to do that and that she should go to sleep. Maria wondered how her stepson had read her mind. Alfred realized he might have said too much and covered his mouth with his hand in a panic, dropping the bread. Stepmother and stepson froze, Maria wondering if Alfred could truly sense her thoughts and feelings. The boy stood on the chair, looking at Maria with a mixture of hope and fear in his eyes. Maria wondered how he had figured it all out, as she still hadn't said a word. How could this child know what she was feeling? Alfred tried to make an excuse, saying he hadn't expected Miss Maria to visit him. He realized it was too obvious, and Maria could see he was lying. Both felt the situation becoming awkward. Alfred thought to himself, embarrassed, that ordinary people couldn't read minds. Maria felt that a lot of things made sense now. Alfred suddenly remembered the rosemary in the tea while he was sitting next to Maria with his hand on her knee. He had simply read his stepmother's mind. Maria thought it was unusual for a child to have such an ability. She wrote a question down on a piece of paper, but Alfred said it wasn't true. Then Maria asked if it was related to the incident with Prince Carlos. Maria noticed Alfred becoming more suspicious as he refused to answer. She wrote another note and passed it through the bars to the boy. "We're friends, right?" Alfred read aloud. The boy paused, then pleaded with Maria not to tell anyone what she had discovered about him. Maria reached through the bars and held out her pinky finger to Alfred. The boy linked his pinky with hers. Maria thought he might trust her, and she would never let him down. Alfred looked at his stepmother with wide eyes. Maria promised to never leave him alone. Alfred, sensing her thoughts, started to cry again. Maria, still holding his hand, thought about how much pain he must have endured all this time alone. Such a young child, keeping such a big secret, finally broke down. As Maria thought about this, she suddenly felt her own tears falling. Alfred explained that he could hear the feelings and thoughts of those he touched. The boy anxiously asked Maria if she was afraid of him. Maria thought that she wasn't afraid, but she wanted to know why Alfred had done that to Prince Carlos. Her stepson told her that the prince had tripped him on purpose, and when he reached out to help him up, Alfred touched Carlos. Alfred sadly shared that he felt the prince's hatred towards him. Alfred discovered Carlos was mocking his deceased mother in his mind. Maria listened as the boy explained to her why he had suddenly become so angry. He couldn't say anything to the prince at the time and was now crying. The image of his mother was right in front of him as Carlos slandered her. Alfred pushed the prince down because of these thoughts, holding Maria's pinky finger. He explained that he had to be a good person and never let anyone insult the memory of his late mother. Maria smiled and said she would support Alfred in everything. The boy happily replied that he was glad Maria had become his friend. Maria, appreciating her stepson, suggested they should continue to work together. Stepmother and stepson, still holding hands through the bars, smiled at each other. They didn't hear the approaching footsteps. The man could clearly see Maria because he was carrying a lantern. The woman noticed the approaching light and turned around anxiously. Standing before Maria was her husband, who wanted to know what she was doing here so late at night. A mixture of emotions crossed her face. Zahar told her she looked terrible. Maria thought to herself that her husband didn't understand how to treat a woman at all. Zahar asked Maria what she was up to this time. Maria considered how to answer. Alfred shouted from behind the door that Maria had come to see him because she was truly worried. Zahar looked at his wife sternly and distrustfully. Wang Hai had wanted to interact with Alfred without her husband's knowledge, but it was proving much more difficult than she had imagined. Suddenly, Wang Hai realized that Zahar knew nothing about his son's abilities. Alfred caught her attention, begging her not to tell his father about what had happened. Looking into the boy's eyes, Wang Hai thought that to get his father to release him from the dungeon, sincere repentance would be better than sincere lies. Zahar angrily asked Maria where she was trying to sneak off to. Alfred suddenly burst into tears and began to beg his father for forgiveness, assuring him that he truly regretted his actions. Zahar said he understood and took out the key to unlock the door. The Duke flung the door open and entered the room where he had previously confined his son. Zahar sternly told his son never to be disrespectful to members of the royal family, and that next time, a mere apology wouldn't be enough to avoid punishment. Alfred, his face pained, agreed. Wang Hai, very angry with the Duke, again tried to shield Alfred with her body. Their eyes met, and tension crackled between them like lightning. Zahar hadn't even tried to understand why Alfred had acted the way he did, but he asked Maria why she was upset. Wang Hai angrily grabbed a pen and wrote a response, unable to remain silent about such a thing. She wrote that Carlos had tripped Alfred, causing him to fall, and angrily showed the note to her husband. Wang Hai was shocked to hear that it didn't matter whether Carlos was guilty because they served the royal family and retaliation was forbidden. Alfred, head bowed, guiltily clutched his stepmother's skirt. Wang Hai thought that parents should, first and foremost, care for their own children. Zahar demanded that Maria not interfere in Alfred's upbringing. Wang Hai was angry, and the boy was saddened to hear these words. The Duke and Duchess's gazes met once more. Wang Hai thought she would never give up on the idea of raising Alfred. The boy tried to divert the adult's attention. He pointed to the window bathed in moonlight and said that the moon goddess was laughing at them. Wang Hai and Zahar looked out the window, but saw nothing. Wang Hai glanced at the Duke again and pulled the smiling Alfred closer. She thought that she hoped the boy would tell her more about his abilities. Alfred smiled and agreed. Later, Maria and Alfred walked away hand in hand, Zahar watching them go. The Duke couldn't remember when his wife and son had started holding hands like that. In the Duke's office, Melio was waiting, wondering if Alfred had been released from the punishment room. Zahar replied that he had released him, although he had initially wanted to keep him locked up until the following evening. Melio knew that the Duke was also worried about his son. He handed Zahar a sealed envelope. The Duke opened the envelope and carefully read the letter. It was an invitation from Marquis Dane, inviting them to visit his home near the snowy mountains. Zahar was not pleased to receive this invitation. They set off on a sunny morning. Duke and Duchess Brown's carriage traveled along the forest path. Alfred looked out the window, amazed by the beautiful scenery. Wang Hai looked at the child tenderly, but Zahar pulled his son away from this interesting activity, telling the boy not to lean out too far. Alfred obediently moved away from the window, placed his hands on his knees, and looked at his stepmother. He admitted that he was looking forward to meeting Maria's family for the first time. Wang Hai also saw how happy he was. Only the journey itself evoked completely different feelings in the Duchess's heart. They were going to the Dane family estate, where an elderly patriarch, his wife, and their grown-up young son live. Wang Hai knew that this place had a terrible reputation. She also suspected the Dane family had some sort of connection to Zahar. Soon, Zahar, Wang Hai, and Alfred stood in front of the Dane residence, which was much smaller than their ducal castle. As they were invited inside, the Duke strode resolutely through the dark halls, Maria and her son following behind. A gray-haired man descended the stairs to greet the guests, announcing that he was the one who had invited them. Wang Hai thought the man looked too much like a villain. She stood behind her husband, looking at the master of the house, trying to accept the fact that this man was her father, Marquis Dane. Zahar bowed, saying it had been a long time, but he was glad to see the host doing well. Marquis Dane replied that Zahar hadn't changed much since their last meeting. Then the host noticed Maria, complimented her appearance, and asked if they were getting along well with Zahar. Marquis Dane invited his guest to sit down with him and discuss everything. Alfred clung tightly to his stepmother's skirt, thinking that the Marquis hadn't even greeted her at first, and it seemed Maria and her father weren't on good terms. In the living room, the host and guests sat facing each other on dark fabric sofas. Wang Hai wrote on a piece of paper that she couldn't speak for some reason and showed the note to her father. Marquis Dane sneered, replying that he never thought his talkative Maria could stay quiet for so long. He then added that he was sorry his daughter had caused so much trouble for Zahar, something the Duke clearly didn't like to hear. The Marquis waved his hand, saying that Maria was his dear daughter, and asked them not to be too harsh on her. Wang Hai clenched her hands nervously, thinking that this old man called Maria his dear daughter while he had been holding her hostage. Zahar looked at his wife, noticing her unease. The Duke said that Maria hadn't caused him any trouble. He told Marquis Dane that Maria had simply lost her voice. Wang Hai was surprised, thinking that Zahar was actually defending her. She looked at her husband curiously. Marquis Dane suggested getting straight to the point. He wanted to expand his mining operations, but couldn't do it without the king's permission. Maria carefully observed her father, unable to discern his true intentions. Perhaps he wanted to use Zahar to gain the king's favor. The Duke asked his counterpart what exactly he meant. Marquis Dane replied that he didn't expect an immediate answer. He wanted to invite Zahar to visit the mining area to get a better understanding of the situation. Zahar stated that the mining industry needed careful consideration, paying attention to all the details. The Marquis smiled and agreed, saying he thought Zahar was a smart man. Then Wang Hai was caught off guard when she heard her father say he was eager to see them and the Duke's children. She was angry that the old man had seen Alfred sitting right there, yet talked about such things in front of the boy. Marquis Dane asked Alfred if he preferred a younger brother or sister, but Alfred was too nervous to respond. Wang Hai, noticing the boy's anxiety, reached out to him. She hugged her stepson, ready to protect him. Wang Hai thought irritably that she already had a child. Alfred huddled fearfully against his stepmother, remaining silent. Marquis Dane sarcastically asked if the boy was also unable to speak. Zahar intervened, explaining that Alfred only spoke to those he trusted. The Marquis continued to smile, saying he could buy something as a first meeting gift. Alfred, not wanting to say what gift he wanted, hid behind Maria at this point. A white-haired man entered the room, addressing Marquis Dane as father. A well-dressed young man with short, light-colored hair joined the group sitting in the living room. He smiled, quipping that he had put Alfred in an awkward position. The young man knelt in front of the sofa where Maria and the child were sitting and asked if the boy was scared, then apologized. Duke Alfred Brown Maria, he said, thanking them for their visit. He announced that dinner was ready and they could continue their conversation at the table. In the dining room, a large table was set, and besides the people Wang Hai had already met, there was another person, a lady in red who shielded her face with a fan. Wang Hai looked at these people, trying to match their faces to the information she knew from the book. The young man was Maria's brother, Daniel, and as a member of the Dane family, he looked quite decent. Alfred, with shining eyes, began to eat, saying it was delicious. Daniel said he was glad the boy liked it and gave another dazzling smile. Wang Hai and Alfred were pleased with how their visit to the Dane residence was progressing. The lady in red mentioned that Maria's tastes and preferences seemed to have changed, asking if she felt the same way, implying that she was her mother. She noted that Maria was wearing less jewelry, and Wang Hai thought the woman herself was probably covered in it. The mother declared that everything made sense now. Inner energy changed, dress preferences shifted, and voice gone. Wang Hai thought the woman was foolish. Mr. Dane suggested returning to their interrupted conversation, asking Zahar if he wanted to inspect the mines tomorrow. Wang Hai mused that the mines of another world were an interesting place, and she wanted to visit, recalling her past life working in a non-ferrous metal factory. Wang Hai placed her hand on Alfred's shoulder, contemplating the trip to the mines with Zahar the following day. She worried about leaving the child home alone and whether he would be frightened. Alfred, thinking of Maria also going, had other ideas. Wang Hai lovingly stroked her stepson's cheek. The boy asked his father to take him to see the mines. Zahar said the suggestion was unexpected, but a visit to the mines wasn't an opportunity every nobleman had, and it would be beneficial for Alfred. He confirmed if the boy truly wanted to go, and Alfred nodded with a smile. The boy turned to Maria and said, "Let's go together." Daniel laughed, saying it was a bad idea, as Maria had no interest in mining, always saying she didn't want to get her dress dirty. Wang Hai wrote on a piece of paper that she also wanted to go. All the members of the Dane family were quite surprised by this. Daniel noted that his sister seemed to have changed a lot, and then offered to accompany their guests on a walk. The next morning, the carriage traveled along the mountain road towards the mines. Wang Hai and Alfred marveled at the unfolding scenery through the window. Mountain peaks soared into the clear sky. This was the Bull's silver mine, the nation's greatest source of wealth. Rows of small houses with chimneys were neatly arranged at the foot of the mountain. This was the miners' village, bustling with life as the workers went about their daily tasks. Daniel, Zahar, Maria, and Alfred walked through the village, observing everything around them. Wang Hai picked up a small stone from the ground. She felt she couldn't tell just by looking, but suspected it might be tin or... Wang Hai knew that tin was often mined alongside silver, and there was a possibility of tin ore here as well, which would increase the nation's interest in this project. Wang Hai looked thoughtfully at the men, who weren't paying attention to her, thinking that even if she could speak and tell her husband all this, he probably wouldn't listen. She showed Alfred the discovery, saying it was a valuable stone, and hoped the Duke would also realize this. The boy ran to his father with the stone, asking him to look at the beautiful rock. Zahar and Daniel turned to the boy. The Duke examined the find carefully, saying it was indeed a rare and valuable mineral. Daniel agreed. But it wasn't silver, so Daniel suggested throwing it away, and he actually tossed the stone to the side of the road. Alfred and Wang Hai watched sadly as the men went to talk with the workers, while Wang Hai pondered sadly what to do next. She picked up the stone, and wrapped it in her handkerchief. Since no one wanted it, she decided to keep it. Just then, Alfred spotted an opening. The boy said something was shining inside and ran in before Wang Hai could call him back. A miner shouted that it was dangerous to enter that hole, and Zahar also tried to stop his son from entering the cave. Wang Hai chased after the boy through the stone tunnel. Alfred was running too fast to catch. Suddenly, the ground beneath her feet shook violently, making it difficult to keep her balance. Wang Hai fearfully thought it might be an earthquake. As darkness descended, Wang Hai felt they had walked into some kind of trap. She didn't know what to do in a place like this and really didn't want to die. She woke up in her husband's arms. Zahar was holding her on his lap, calling her name. Wang Hai could hardly believe this was happening. Zahar looked at her, and she tried to figure out if everything was all right. To her surprise, she realized the Duke had saved her. Then she remembered Alfred, who had run into the cave. She looked anxiously at the Duke, expecting him to tell her where her son was. Zahar, holding a lit lantern, peered into the darkness, trying to figure out how they had missed the boy. The Duke's shirt sleeve was stained with blood. Wang Hai nervously noticed the Duke had been injured while saving her. Zahar, noticing her gaze, said he was fine and that Maria should be more worried about Alfred. He started calling out for the boy, asking where he was. Wang Hai clasped her hands together in prayer, hoping the child was safe. Alfred shouted from behind the stone wall that he could hear his parents' voices. Zahar called out, asking if the boy was all right and if he was hurt. Alfred replied that he was a little scraped up, but not seriously injured. The Duke said, "It's good to know the boy is at least conscious." Zahar told his son to hold on a little longer, promising someone would come for him soon. The Duke placed the lantern on a stone, saying that if they climbed these loose rocks, they could reach the other side. Zahar told Maria to wait below and began feeling around the stones for the easiest path to climb. Wang Hai decisively tore a piece of cloth from her sleeve and used it to bandage Zahar's wound. Although it was only a temporary fix, it was better than nothing. The Duke thanked her, agreeing that it was indeed better. Wang Hai continued to hold the lantern while Zahar climbed over the rock debris. The Duke called out to his son through the crevices in the stones. Alfred heard his father's voice emerge from the darkness. The Duke hugged his son tightly, saying everything was all right. Alfred wrapped his arms around his father's neck. Zahar said it was time to leave and told his son to go first. The Duke lifted Alfred up and the boy began to climb the rocks. He looked out through the crevice, as if through a window, and saw Maria holding the lantern. Wang Hai pressed her hand to her chest, immensely relieved to see her stepson safe and sound. Suddenly, she felt the ground tremble again. It was bad. Alfred hesitated to climb down. Wang Hai, her eyes fixed on a boy, screamed in terror. She urged Alfred to jump, holding out her hands to catch him. The boy jumped into Maria's arms. Wang Hai held him tightly, asking if he was hurt, if he was really all right. Alfred assured his stepmother that he was fine, but asked her not to scream so loudly, or he would go deaf. Wang Hai then realized her voice had indeed returned. She had been too frightened to notice. Zahar joined his family and asked if Maria's voice had really returned. Wang Hai shyly lowered her head, confirming that it had. She said it came back the moment she cried out Alfred's name. Wang Hai gently stroked the boy's cheek with her palm, and he smiled back at her. Alfred reached out to Maria, joyfully exclaiming how wonderful it was that she could speak again, congratulating her with a happy smile. Wang Hai hugged her stepson and thanked him. Bright light shone through a hole in the ceiling of the cave. Zahar was the first to notice and looked up. Someone called down to them. It was the workers clearing the rubble. They had finally found them and asked if they were all alive. Wang Hai cried out in fear, urging them to hurry and rescue them. Safe and rescued, they spent the night at the Dane residence. Exhausted, Alfred quickly fell asleep. Wang Hai came to tuck him in, telling him he had done a great job. She wished the boy good night and carefully closed the door as she left the bedroom. Wang Hai decided to attend to another important matter. She knocked on another locked door, requesting entry. She cautiously peered into the bedroom. Zahar was sitting in a chair by the window, gazing at the starry sky. He turned and asked what was the matter. Wang Hai held out the first aid kit she had brought, saying she had come to tend to her husband's injuries from the cave. Zahar said it wasn't necessary, that they were just scrapes, nothing serious. Wang Hai asked if he was sure, but the Duke replied that it wouldn't be a big deal to take care of them when they returned home tomorrow. Wang Hai became annoyed and demanded the Duke come over, saying that leaving the wounds untreated could lead to complications. Zahar was surprised by her firm tone. He came and sat beside Maria, but didn't look at her, saying everything was fine. Wang Hai remembered how little Alfred had cried and refused to let her treat his scraped knees. She thought father and son were very much alike, both hating to be fussed over. Wang Hai told Zahar to show her where he was hurt. The Duke resignedly began to undress. Wang Hai realized with embarrassment that she wasn't quite prepared for this. She stared at the Duke's handsome, half-naked form, wondering why she was suddenly so flustered, finding it difficult to look away. The Duke turned his back, and Wang Hai saw the large bruises. Zahar's injuries were worse than she had expected. Wang Hai lowered her head and apologized that the Duke had been injured because of her, but Zahar said it wasn't her fault, as he had chosen to protect her. The Duke mentioned that, besides, Maria's prompt bandaging of his bleeding wound had been very helpful. Wang Hai said that considering she was safe and sound thanks to Zahar, she wanted to do what she could. The Duke closed his eyes, his expression unreadable. Wang Hai told him he shouldn't hide his injuries, but Zahar replied that there was no need to worry. He admitted he couldn't bear the thought of anything happening to his son. Wang Hai, applying medicine to the gauze, said she understood completely. Zahar started to say something, then stopped. Maria immediately asked him to repeat himself. The Duke said that the day he thought Maria had deliberately pushed Alfred down the stairs, he now realized how terribly wrong he was. He felt very sorry and wanted to apologize for that. Wang Hai thought tenderly that her husband was an incredibly honest man. She gently wiped Zahar's back with a medicated cloth. Wang Hai said she would always remember these words. She looked at the Duke with satisfaction. The next morning, they prepared to return home, bidding farewell to Daniel in the courtyard of the manor. Daniel said he was sorry for the trouble during their visit. Zahar bowed slightly and said he was still grateful for the guidance and help, but thanks to that unfortunate accident, Maria regained her voice. It seemed that fate itself had guided them to that cave. Daniel looked carefully at Wang Hai and said his sister had changed a lot after marriage, as if she had become another person. These words truly shocked Wang Hai. She deliberately laughed loudly and said a happy marriage could change anyone, but in her heart, she thought she had to leave quickly to avoid further suspicion. The carriage was already waiting, ready to depart. Wang Hai thought she would never return to Maria's home again. Soon they were back at the castle. As soon as Melio saw the Duke get off the carriage, he hurried over. The young man bowed and apologized for discussing business so early, but Zahar immediately asked what had happened. Melio explained that they had received news that the ship carrying silver for international trade had capsized in a storm. Zahar anxiously asked his aide to explain the specific situation. He specifically asked about the crew, and Melio confirmed that everyone had survived, but all the silver they had accumulated had sunk to the bottom of the sea. Zahar thoughtfully said they needed to quickly find a substitute for the silver and asked if His Majesty knew about this. Melio replied that he probably didn't know yet. The Duke said they needed to resolve all diplomatic issues, so he was going to the palace now. Wang Hai noted that they had just returned, but Zahar said he had to hurry and told Maria to take care of Alfred. Wang Hai looked at him sadly and said she understood, just asking the Duke to be careful. She and Alfred could only anxiously watch as the carriage drove towards the castle gates. Entering the house, Wang Hai collapsed on the sofa, exhausted, saying she was worn out. Alfred asked if his father would be all right, and if there was anything they could do to help. Wang Hai looked thoughtfully at the boy. Alfred rested his head on her leg, and she stroked his hair. Wang Hai said this was the nature of his father's work. It was very hard, and all they could do was wait patiently for Zahar to return. To keep the boy from feeling sad, she started tickling him and playing with him. Wang Hai made a scary face and pretended to attack Alfred, who laughed happily. Wang Hai thought he was such a lovely child. Suddenly, an unexpected thought struck her. In her past life, she had never considered having children. Alfred was truly special, she thought, stroking his head. The boy, sensing her thoughts, asked what was on her mind. Wang Hai smiled and told him he had supernatural abilities. She remembered asking him before to share more about his abilities. Both fell into contemplation. Wang Hai thought about how she had already tried to ask the boy about this before. Alfred was considering whether to bring it up again. Alfred looked at his stepmother and said Maria was also special. The boy explained that his mother and grandmother had the same ability, but it caused them a lot of trouble, so they told him to keep it a secret. Wang Hai thought this made sense. If bad people knew about this ability, they would definitely abuse it. Alfred turned away, adding that his ability had many drawbacks. Alfred was used to constantly hearing various thoughts, including some about himself. Some people wished he would disappear or even die. Alfred admitted that he heard a lot of unpleasant voices, which was why he tried to keep his distance from everyone and not get too close to anyone. Wang Hai thought Alfred must have gone through a lot of difficulties. The boy said happily that thanks to this ability, he was able to become friends with Maria, and now he was very happy. Wang Hai was deeply moved by these words. She told the boy how she felt, and they hugged each other. Alfred only said that he hoped his father could also be free from his worries. Wang Hai looked at her stepson with concern. She agreed with what he had just said. Wang Hai remembered the silver from the shipwreck. She was certain Zahar had mentioned finding a substitute for the metal. A sudden thought flashed through her mind. She still had a small stone wrapped in a handkerchief in her pocket, found near the mine. Wang Hai took out the stone, mentioned it might be useful, and headed to the city's grand library with Alfred. The library's vast collection excited Alfred. Wang Hai believed they would find the answer amongst the numerous books. Sure enough, she found the information she needed in one of them. It was exactly what they needed. The text described the stone in detail. Metallic luster, color ranging from brown to light yellow, with black streaks. Wang Hai happily examined her discovery. Without a doubt, it was tin, or Alfred, sitting in a nearby chair, exclaimed excitedly, "Wonderful. You can make all sorts of things with tin, even develop a whole industry." Back at the castle, Melio greeted Wang Hai and Alfred, asking where they had been. Wang Hai explained they went to the library and inquired if Zahar had returned. Melio replied that the Duke had returned, but he felt it best not to disturb him at the moment. Maria asked how serious the shipwreck incident was. Melio avoided her gaze, feeling the Duchess's words were as sharp as knives. Melio said that the Duke was too busy and it was best not to disturb him, but Wang Hai didn't wait for him to finish before heading inside, telling the young man to look after Alfred. The woman resolutely walked into her husband's office. Zahar looked up from the documents he was reviewing, his expression tired and worried. As Maria approached his desk, Zahar apologized, saying he was truly busy at the moment. Wang Hai stated she had something to tell him and presented her stone. Zahar examined the discovery carefully, asking if she had found it during her recent visit to the Dalnob mines. The Duke recalled that he and Daniel had already examined this mineral. Wang Hai declared she had been curious about the stone, so she did some research and was now certain it was tin. She mentioned that the Bolt's mine had a lot of this ore, and it sold for the same price as silver. Zahar asked what was so special about this metal. Maria explained that tin was softer than silver and easier to work with. It could be used to make utensil racks, bottle molds, and the entire processing was simpler. Moreover, tin didn't rust, its color and texture were comparable to silver, and its low melting point made it easy to manufacture. After listening to this unexpected explanation, Zahar asked why such a useful mineral was hidden in this country and why it hadn't been mined before. Maria stated that if things went well, these overlooked stones could bring in a fortune. Zahar was curious where she got this information. Wang Hai thought for a moment, feeling she might have said too much. She said she came from the Dean family, and the Bolt's mine had always belonged to her family, so she naturally had extensive knowledge of mining. Zahar replied that he found it hard to believe that everything he had heard about Maria was a lie. His wife was nothing like the girl he thought he knew, but a very diligent person. The Duke said everyone, including himself, had misunderstood her. Maria smiled and said that people shouldn't underestimate her. She couldn't tell anyone that all her knowledge came from her past life's hard work in the non-ferrous metal industry. Zahar said he was very surprised by Maria's recent performance. She had exceeded his expectations. Wang Hai asked if the Duke was praising her, and he confirmed that he was. Zahar said he had been busy looking for a substitute for silver because his ship carrying silver to a friendly nation had recently sunk. The Duke was fully responsible for that mission, so now everything that had happened was his responsibility, and solving this problem was also up to him. Maria said she was glad he was willing to share this and handed him the piece of tin, saying it would definitely help. Wang Hai decided to write to her brother immediately, hoping Daniel would reply quickly since they had a brand new business venture start. Zahar said he would be grateful if Maria could do so. Wang Hai told him that if Zahar encountered any more problems, he could share them with her, and they would solve them together, just like he had saved her in the cave. Zahar smiled in return. Maria said she was going to write to her brother. She turned to leave, but tripped over a pile of books on the floor. Wang Hai flailed her arms, tried to regain her balance. Zahar rushed over and caught her. Wang Hai felt the Duke's hand on her waist. To her surprise, she and Zahar were suddenly so close, making her uncomfortable. Zahar released her, commenting that she was heavier than he thought. The remark offended her. She pushed his hand away firmly, thanked him for his help, and said she would leave. Zahar looked at her in confusion. He felt he had only wanted to help Maria. Zahar looked at his hands. A while later, the Duke received some new pottery samples. The box Melio brought contained beautiful tin cups. Wang Hai picked one up and remarked on how lovely they were. She expressed her desire for one. Zahar mentioned he had been to see the king. His Majesty mentioned that the recent crisis had actually benefited the country. Melio explained that Maria's idea had been successful, as Zahar had already reported it to His Majesty. Wang Hai exclaimed that there was no need to discuss it. She had only shared her research idea with them. She feared that attracting too much attention would expose her identity, and if they needed more information, they wouldn't leave her alone. Zahar thought the idea was foolish. He simply wanted His Majesty to know that Maria wasn't the villain everyone said she was. Zahar appreciated that his wife took the future of the country seriously. Wang Hai felt this meant Zahar was slowly starting to acknowledge her, and she couldn't help but feel happy about it. She slyly glanced at the Duke, thinking that everything that had happened was keeping her away from the doom she had always feared. Zahar watched her, pleased because she had done well. This put the woman in extreme unease, as she believed she was facing a difficult journey that would lead her away from all threats. The awkward scene continued. Tin cups and other accessories became increasingly popular, with more manufacturers entering the market. The new ore was easy to process, and the products were beautiful and rust-proof. Everyone's eyes were on Maria. She believed that this protected the country's interests and was a good outcome for the Dane family. But Wang Hai wondered if Maria's father would be happy about it. She decided to ask Zahar about her family matters, but couldn't find the right words. Finally, she asked if her father had said anything. Wang Hai knew that the head of the Dane family had recently had some disagreements with His Majesty. Zahar replied that Mr. Dane hadn't said anything in particular. All the tin was mined from the mines owned by the Dane family. Zahar said that all the Dane family members had received their share, even an extra portion. Wang Hai, looking at her reflection in the glass, worried that Maria's father would cause trouble, as he was a greedy man. Zahar was surprised when she said this. He had never thought Maria would view her father that way. Wang Hai smiled, as she couldn't tell the Duke that Maria was actually a completely different person inside. She rose from the table to leave. She still needed to write to Daniel to thank him for taking the time to deal with the tin issue. Maria sat at the huge desk, rereading the letter. It was a miracle that the Dane family had one decent person. Daniel had been a great help with the new project. Her father could never have managed it so quickly. Wang Hai thought she saw something strange. Outside the window, the lady went to the window and gazed at the garden in the twilight. Alfred was walking alone in the park. Wang Hai was curious where the boy was going. Alfred continued walking deeper into the darkening park. A blank sheet of paper lay before Wang Hai. She tried to continue writing, glancing anxiously out the window as the weather worsened. The maid rushed into the room screaming, then stopped to apologize for disturbing Madam at this hour. Wang Hai asked what had happened. The maid admitted she had searched the entire mansion but couldn't find Alfred and asked if Madam had seen him. Wang Hai also became seriously worried. After all, she had seen where the boy had gone. She wondered if Alfred hadn't returned from the park yet. Zahar noticed Maria preparing to leave the house and asked if she thought the storm was getting too fierce. Wang Hai mentioned that she had seen Alfred heading towards the forest. Zahar asked what the boy was doing there. Wang Hai didn't know, but she felt there must be a reason. Melio called out to the Duke, and the young man hurried over. He had searched the entire mansion again, but still couldn't find the boy. Wang Hai felt her heart clench with fear. She cried out that they needed to search the forest for Alfred, but Zahar stopped her, saying it was too dangerous to go alone, so he would go with her. Melio said it was unsafe for the Duke and Madam to venture out. He would rather go with the servants himself. Zahar put his hand on his chest and said that, as Alfred's father, he should be the one to search for his son. Melio was surprised to hear this. Zahar wrapped himself in a cloak and decisively pushed open the door into the inclement weather. The Duke instructed Maria to stay behind him and close to him so that he could at least offer her some protection. Soon they saw Alfred sitting on the ground behind a tree, the rain pouring down around him like a wall. The boy clutched a small kitten tightly as Zahar began yelling at his son, demanding to know why he was outside in such weather and what he could possibly have been thinking. Alfred looked at his father and said he just wanted to protect the kitten because a storm was coming and the kitten was all alone. Zahar roared that he didn't care. The boy, trembling, looked at his father. Zahar reached out to grab the kitten, telling him to leave it and go home. Alfred took a step back, adamant that he would never do such a thing. He cried, saying the kitten would die there if his father forced him. Maria reached out and embraced her son, stroking Alfred's head and telling him it was all right. They could take the kitten home with them. Alfred, his eyes brimming with tears, looked at his stepmother and asked if the kitten could really come with them. Maria smiled at him and said yes. She reminded Zahar that the most important thing was to get home quickly. The Duke, though not entirely pleased with the decision, agreed to take the kitten. They soon arrived back at the mansion, where the maids flocked around them. Maria immediately ordered hot water to be prepared. Alfred needed a hot bath right away. She told the boy to give her the kitten and go warm up. Alfred pleaded with her to take good care of it, and Maria assured him that she would. The maids took the boy to his room, while Maria bathed the kitten with warm water. She remarked on how lucky the kitten was, as if it had found a guardian angel in Alfred. Maria was still tending to the kitten when Zahar entered the room. Zahar said stray cats carry all sorts of diseases that humans can easily catch, so they needed to get rid of it. Maria said she couldn't do that because she had promised Alfred. The Duke and Duchess began to argue, one insisting that as the head of the family he could forbid the cat from staying, the other arguing that Alfred had risked his life to protect it. Maria stated that she was aware of all the risks, but since she had taken responsibility for the kitten's life, she wouldn't let anyone harm it. Zahar said she was being stubborn, but he would send for the veterinarian. In the meantime, Maria was to make sure the kitten didn't climb anywhere out of reach and that no one else touched it. Alfred, having caught a fever after being in the rain, was now lying in bed with a fever-reducing patch. Maria came in holding the white kitten and asked him how he was feeling. Alfred said he was fine and immediately asked about the kitten. Maria replied that the kitten was also fine and told him to rest and regain his strength. Alfred smiled, closed his eyes, and quickly fell asleep. Zahar entered the room and asked if the boy was asleep. Maria said he fell asleep immediately, which was to be expected as the cold had exhausted him. Zahar sat on the edge of the bed, looking at his son and wondering from whom he had inherited such noble qualities. He placed his hand on the boy's forehead and found that the fever wasn't too high. Zahar visibly relaxed and smiled. Maria looked at him, a feeling she couldn't quite understand welling up inside her. The kitten she had been holding suddenly jumped onto Zahar's lap. The Duke, annoyed, demanded the kitten get down and asked Maria to help, telling her not to laugh. Maria thought to herself that she had expected Zahar to severely punish her for her willfulness, but he was much gentler and kinder than she had anticipated. She picked up the kitten from him and held it close. Maria said she wanted to understand him better and suggested they talk. Zahar looked at his wife intently. They moved to the chairs by the low table. Alfred was fast asleep, and the kitten was warming itself on his bed. Zahar asked what they could possibly talk about. Maria hesitated, then said she had been wondering why the Duke was so strict with Alfred. He explained that the Brown family had close ties to the king for generations, so his son had to be raised strictly to be worthy of that status. Maria exclaimed that she understood the reasons, but the boy was only 5 years old. Zahar said Alfred needed to understand all matters from a young age. Suddenly Maria guessed something and asked if he had gone through the same thing. Zahar nodded, confirming that every day his father would instruct him, yelling that he couldn't do even the simplest things and making him repeat exercises over and over. The boy trained with all his might, wanting to impress his father. He desperately wanted his father's approval, always looking back for his support. But his father was never pleased with his achievements, saying the boy was untalented. He lamented his son's incompetence. Zahar never thought that training was something he didn't want to do. Sometimes he just didn't want to do it because he felt very lonely. Maria told him that Zahar didn't have to be as strict as his father and that there were other ways to train Alfred. Then she remembered how she had trained Alfred and felt that before giving advice to others, she should reflect on her own methods. Zahar covered his head with his hands, saying he didn't want Alfred to die. Maria looked at him in confusion. Zahar explained that his father died protecting the king, and that even well-trained people die, so the amount of training isn't the deciding factor. Zahar said he had already lost one precious soul. Maria realized the Duke was talking about his first wife, Alfred's mother. She voiced her thought that Alfred was growing into a fine child, and perhaps harsh training methods weren't effective. Zahar speculated that his late wife deserved a lot of credit for Alfred's growth, and Maria added that the child's mother was a very kind and gentle person. Zahar looked at Maria in surprise. She asked him what he saw in her. Zahar looked down and admitted that he again felt that she was a completely different person from what he had previously imagined. In the past, she had been described as a detestable and terrible villain. Although this was the original storyline of the book, it was still difficult for Maria to hear these words again and again. Zahar glanced at the bed where Alfred was sleeping. He remembered the change in the child's behavior after Maria's appearance. The boy had mentioned Maria being his friend. Zahar said that recently Alfred rarely stayed quiet and talked much more than before. Maria quietly looked at the Duke. She wanted to hear him speak again. After a while, Zahar sat in his office reading a book. Maria's smiling face appeared in his mind, and these thoughts prevented him from concentrating on his work. Zahar leaned back in his chair and covered his eyes with his hand, finding it difficult to focus. Suddenly, the office door burst open, and Maria rushed in. Her face was full of anxiety, and Zahar waited anxiously to hear what news she brought. It was a bright winter day, and Alfred, in a new coat, was running around cheerfully, with Melio trying to calm him down. Maria told Zahar they had something important to do. Zahar didn't understand at first, kept asking her what was wrong and why they needed to go to town. They went to the market because Maria said she needed to buy gifts. Maria's face was filled with joyful excitement as she said the gifts were for Zahar. Maria was carefully decorating the Christmas tree. She was very pleased with how the decorations looked. Alfred came over holding the kitten, marveling at how big the Christmas tree was. Alfred wanted to help decorate too, and he started hanging ornaments on the lower branches of the tree. The boy asked the kitten if it could see how beautiful the tree was. The kitten just meowed in response. Maria said the kitten seemed to like its new name. Alfred had named the kitten Milk, and he loved playing with it. Maria had always dreamed of a wonderful Christmas, as her family had never celebrated it. Now she could do everything the way she wanted. Alfred asked his stepmother what else people did at Christmas. It suddenly occurred to Maria that Alfred had never properly celebrated the holiday either. The boy's mother had died last year, and ignoring the holiday now could lead to the dark ending in the book. Maria told Zahar she wanted to make this end of year very fun for Alfred. Zahar listened in surprise as Maria talked about making Christmas memorable. A happy Alfred ran around, calling for his father and Maria. Maria went over to him and crouched down to be at eye level with the child. She looked at her stepson's smiling face as he hugged her. Zahar watched this scene carefully, thinking that this Christmas really could be Alfred's best day of the year. They walked together through the streets of the capital. Maria asked Alfred what he wanted. The boy stared at the brightly colored lollipops being sold in a local shop. Alfred's desire was obvious. Suddenly, Alfred said he actually wanted Maria to pick out the best clothes for him. Maria looked at her husband in confusion. He agreed, and they went to the store. Alfred tried on many different outfits. Maria thought he looked adorable in every outfit and didn't know what to do, unable to choose just one. A large pile of clothes lay before them. Maria asked Zahar if they could buy them all. The Duke agreed, saying since there was no way to choose, they might as well buy everything. Maria mentioned there was a shop nearby she wanted to check out, so she would be leaving for a bit. Zahar smiled and told her to go, saying they would be right here and for her to come back and find them when she was done. Maria walked outside and remembered the candy that Alfred liked so much. She returned to the candy store and picked out a lollipop with kitten ears for her stepson. She was sure Alfred would love the lollipop. As she strolled down the street, lollipop in hand, the enemy's hand reached out for her. Someone grabbed Maria, squeezing her wrist tightly. She was dragged around the corner, the force and speed so great that the lollipop fell from her hand. The stranger shoved Maria against the wall. A bearded man with 2 scars on his face, dressed in unusual clothes, said he'd been looking for her. He asked about the murder, which greatly confused Nozomi. The lollipop with ears lay on the ground at the scene. Nozomi asked who the stranger had mistaken her for. The man sneered, saying he was very sure it was Maria, who placed the order, he remembered it clearly. But Nozomi had no idea what he was talking about, or what murder he meant. The man said she was supposed to tell him the final date, but she disappeared for too long. Nozomi exclaimed that this was a misunderstanding, as she had never made any agreement with this man. The stranger handed her a photograph of a sad Alfred holding a plush cat. The man claimed she had given him the picture of the boy, as this was the very target they needed to kill. Nozomi stared in shock at the photograph of her stepson. The stranger, noticing the expression on her face, asked if she knew the boy, as judging by her reaction, they must be familiar. He mentioned that half a year ago, a lady in a hooded cloak came to them for a job, and it was easy to recognize her as Maria. At first, the lady was talking to the young man. She showed a picture, saying this boy needed to be killed and to make sure no trace was left. The stranger approached them, asking if the money she brought was too little to pay for such a job. The lady said it was just a down payment, and if they successfully completed the task, there would be a generous reward. The thugs exchanged glances. The older one, now holding Nozomi, suggested the younger one talk privately, and then only the older one returned, scrutinizing the lady. The lady said the kid was like a pebble in her shoe, always with that knowing look, and because of him, she didn't even want children anymore. He ruined everything. The thug said he agreed, if someone bothers you, you have to get rid of them. The lady lifted the thug's chin with her finger, saying he was quite something and they would definitely get along. This is what the previous Maria said to the thug, while the current Nozomi stood in fear before her captor, covering her face with her hands. She couldn't believe that right before her transformation, Maria would order Alfred's murder. It was disgusting. She said she was sorry the order was canceled, and now she wanted the photo back for everyone to forget about it, and she would pay all the promised money. The thug said the down payment was long gone, and now they needed more cash than the agreed amount. He also wanted compensation. Nozomi agreed to do as he said, saying the most important thing was to cancel the order, as she no longer needed it. But the thug pressed a cloth to her face. He said the woman was mocking him, and he didn't care about her circumstances. Nozomi lost consciousness in his arms. He slung the unconscious Nozomi over his shoulder and left the place. Meanwhile, Alfred and Zahar noticed Maria had been gone for too long. The Duke wondered how far she had gone for shopping. Alfred suggested that Maria might be lost and suggested to his father they should look for her. The Duke replied that she would return on her own soon. Alfred insisted on going, as he was starting to worry, and Zahar suggested they look for Maria as soon as they finished checking out at the store. They walked out into the street, Alfred running around and calling out Maria's name. Zahar asked shopkeepers if they had seen a silver-haired girl, but no one remembered seeing her. Alfred suddenly noticed a lollipop with ears lying on the ground. He picked up the candy and looked at it sadly. At that moment, in a dilapidated house on the outskirts of the city, Nozomi woke up. She was kneeling on some old carpets, surrounded by overturned furniture, her hands tied behind her back. The stranger noticed she was awake and asked if she was feeling nostalgic, if she remembered this place. Maria recognized him and screamed. She tried to move, but her hands were tied tightly, and the stranger said there was no need to go crazy. Nozomi asked what he was going to do to her. The stranger explained that while she was asleep, he had been thinking about what to do with her next. She looked beautiful and could be sold directly. He added that there was another option if someone was willing to pay a ransom, as judging by her clothes, she was from a wealthy family, a noble. Nozomi said her family was ordinary and almost bankrupt. The stranger replied that it was a pity, then there was only one option left, to sell her to someone else. Nozomi was terrified. Meanwhile, on the streets of the capital, Alfred, holding the lollipop with ears, recognized the candy he had seen recently. Maria noticed Alfred had become very sad, perhaps because she had left them only to get him this candy. His father came over and asked him what he had found, and Alfred began talking about the candy in Maria, but stopped mid-sentence. Because his father didn't know about his son's magical abilities, he couldn't tell him about the recent events. The boy suddenly rushed into the crowd, sensing Maria was nearby. The boy accidentally bumped into a passerby, who rudely told him to watch where he was going. Alfred caught the man's thoughts. He was thinking about getting back to his brother. The child thought the man was thinking about Maria. Alfred became excited because the man was leaving, but perhaps he wasn't thinking about Maria at all. But the stranger might actually be thinking about her. Alfred came up with a plan and prepared to act. He caught up to the stranger, grabbed his leg, and shouted, "Hey, mister, where are you going?" The stranger tried to shake him off, but without success. The stranger thought he needed to get back to the hideout as soon as possible, and Alfred guessed that was where they were keeping Maria. The boy didn't know what to do next, as the stranger kept trying to push him away. Finally, the thug managed to push him off, but Alfred managed to slip a piece of candy into his pocket just in time. Alfred fell to the ground. His father helped him up, and Zahar rushed over to ask if he was badly hurt. A stranger commented that the child needed better discipline. The stranger walked away, but Zahar ignored him and continued to ask Alfred why he wasn't answering, worried that he had fallen too hard. Alfred assured everyone he was fine and pointed to the departing stranger, saying that the man had stolen his candy. At first, Zahar didn't believe him, but when Alfred pointed to the stranger's pocket, a piece of candy could indeed be seen sticking out. Zahar recognized it as the candy Alfred had picked up from the ground. Alfred said the candy was still clean and he wanted to keep it, but the stranger had snatched it from him. Zahar looked at his son, thinking that the man was no longer a child and didn't need candy at all. Alfred hoped his father would believe him and not realize he was lying. After a moment of thought, Zahar declared that it was unacceptable to steal candy from a child, and he intended to return the candy to Alfred. The stranger arrived at an abandoned house on the outskirts of town. Zahar and Alfred followed him and were now hiding nearby. Zahar held the boy in his arms. The Duke noticed that the stranger was being unusually cautious, looking around. Zahar told Alfred that he would follow the man himself and that the boy should wait for him here. Alfred insisted on going with his father, but the Duke sternly forbade it. The boy clenched his fists and said that there were some things he could handle now. Zahar noticed that his son wasn't so timid anymore. The Duke said he understood his son, but this time it could be really dangerous, so he asked Alfred to hide here for safety. The boy had to admit he needed to obey his father, so he hid behind a bush. Zahar smiled and left. The Duke walked to the door of the old house. It was locked, so he had to knock. The thug opened the door a crack and asked the Duke who he was. Taking a closer look at his face, the man recognized him as the father of the child who had attacked him on the street. The thug asked Zahar why he was following him. The Duke explained that his son said someone had stolen his candy, and now he was here to get it back. The thug didn't understand at first, but Zahar pointed to the candy still bulging in his pocket. The stranger apologized for the disturbance and said he would return the candy to Zahar right away. The Duke didn't let him close the door, blocking it with his hand, and said he wanted to ask the guy something else. He mentioned he was looking for someone with silver hair. The thug first said he didn't know, but then asked Zahar what his relationship was with the woman. The Duke realized he hadn't specified he was looking for a woman. Zahar pulled out a dagger and pointed it at the other man. The blade whistled past the stranger's ear. Zahar demanded to know where his wife was. Meanwhile, the gang leader was interrogating Wang Hai, asking who she was and threatening to sell her. He said he really didn't want to sell such a beautiful woman and reached out to touch Wang Hai, but she bit his hand hard. The bandit cursed and pulled his hand back. He said he had intended to sell her alive as a slave, but now he would kill her and sell her organs. The stranger swung his knife to stab the woman, not noticing Zahar watching the whole thing. Maria was the first to notice the unexpected rescue. Zahar shouted, asking if she was all right. The Duke easily knocked down his first opponent. Wang Hai watched the fight from the sidelines. Zahar demanded the bandits release his wife. The second bandit grabbed a woman, intending to use her as a hostage. He held a knife to Wang Hai's throat and ordered everyone to freeze. The bandit threatened what would happen if the Duke took another step closer. A terrified Alfred watched through the window. He was deeply worried about Maria and his father. His father had told him to hide, but now only he could help them. The boy was thinking about what to do. Alfred slipped into the room from the other side and lunged at the bandit. The bandit cursed and flung the boy off his shoulder. Alfred tumbled several feet away, landing hard on the floor. The bandit swung his knife at the boy, yelling that if he wanted to die, he'd be happy to oblige. Maria rushed forward in terror to save Alfred. The knife plunged into her back, and blood spurted out. Alfred stared, his eyes wide. When he realized what had happened, tears welled up in his eyes. Maria collapsed, and Alfred rushed to her side, pressing his hands against the wound. He called her name, his palms soaked in blood. Alfred stared at his hands in horror. Zahar had run to them, taking off his coat and trying to staunch the bleeding with the thick fabric. The bleeding was too severe. Alfred sobbed, and Zahar thought that at this rate, Maria would bleed out soon. The Duke lifted his wife. They needed to find a doctor quickly. Maria had lost consciousness, a trickle of blood escaping her lips. Wang Hai found herself in a sunlit meadow, strolling through the flowers and grass in a light dress. It was a place of unimaginable beauty. She came to a river and carefully stepped into the pearly water, barefoot. Wang Hai waded into the river, slowly making her way to the other side. Suddenly, she heard someone calling her. A familiar child's voice cried, "Mama." Wang Hai turned, unsure of what she was hearing, thinking she had misheard. The wind stirred her hair, swirling tiny flower petals around her. Wang Hai thought she might have imagined it. Besides, she needed to reach the other side. The child's voice came again. "Mama, don't go." The child screamed. Wang Hai realized she recognized the voice. She suddenly understood it was Alfred. The boy stood on the bank she was leaving, sobbing uncontrollably. Alfred couldn't even open his eyes because of the tears. He kept calling Mama, begging her not to die. Wang Hai's heart ached. Alfred cried and called her, kept calling her Mama. The boy sat by the bedside, unable to stop his sobs. The white-haired doctor said he had done all he could, but the patient's condition was critical. "Don't go, Mama." Alfred repeated, "I'm happy with you, Maria. You like my Mama." Maria's eyes remained closed. In the sunlit meadow, Wang Hai's brow furrowed with determination. She knew she had to return to Alfred. She couldn't bear to see him cry anymore, to see the sorrowful expression on his face. Wang Hai climbed out of the water and began to run across the flowering meadow. She called out to Alfred. The boy was still crying, frozen in place. Maria opened her eyes on the bed. Alfred leaned over her, truly calling out, "Mama." Wang Hai reached out, her hand trembling, to touch his face, saying he was calling her Mama. Alfred looked at her, his eyes brimming with tears, saying that she was indeed his Mama. Wang Hai couldn't help but cry as well. She hugged the boy tightly and thanked him. Then Wang Hai saw Zahar standing by the bed, watching him. Suddenly, the man also knelt by the bed and embraced Maria. Wang Hai couldn't believe what was happening was real. The Duke held her close, repeating how relieved he was that she had awakened, how he had feared she would never wake again. Wang Hai suddenly realized she had reminded Zahar of his first wife's death. She apologized for making everyone worry about her. Time passed, and Maria slowly recovered. Now she could walk in the garden, supported by Zahar. Walking was still difficult. It was Alfred's idea. He suggested they take a short walk together every day. A sharp pain shot through her wound. Zahar said that if she was in pain, they could call the doctor again. But Wang Hai said she had only just begun her recovery. She hugged Alfred and told him not to worry, promising she would be better soon. The boy held out his pinky, making Maria promise not to push herself to do anything. Maria happily linked pinkies with him. Alfred ran off happily to train, Maria waving after him, pleased that he now called her Mom. Ever since he started calling her that, Maria had been overjoyed. Alfred would share his accomplishments with her, telling her how strong he was becoming. He would touch her hand and listen to her thoughts. He promised to become stronger and always protect his mom. Maria recalled how scared and trembling Alfred had been when she first met him, and thought they had avoided the dark ending in the book. From that day on, Alfred began to train proactively. Zahar noticed the child's growth was faster than imagined. Alfred had changed a lot since Maria appeared. Zahar and Maria sat at the low table on the balcony, drinking tea. The Duke commented that Alfred wasn't the kind of child who would risk himself for others or say he wanted to help others before. Maria disagreed, saying she always thought Alfred was kind and strong by nature. She added that the child was a lot like his father, glancing at the Duke's bewildered expression. Zahar, embarrassed, looked away after thanking Maria. He wanted to ask Maria a question, but waited until the Duchess had fully recovered. He wanted to know why Maria had been attacked. Maria wasn't ready to discuss it. She didn't know what to say, as she couldn't reveal that the previous Maria had wanted to kill Alfred. Maria said that she was walking down the street when these men surrounded her, and when she started screaming for help, they forcibly took her away. Zahar told her that next time she encountered such people, she should just run away, because once she attracted their attention, they might keep chasing her. Maria sighed in relief and promised to be more careful in the future, while thinking about what else that which Maria had done in the past. Zahar said that she risked her life to protect Alfred, and he was truly grateful. Maria was surprised to hear this, but replied that it was nothing to be thanked for. She smiled brightly and said that she was Alfred's mom. Zahar smiled in agreement. Maria thought her husband's smile was was truly gentle. Zahar said that while Maria was ill, His Majesty had invited them to a tea party, but because Maria's injuries hadn't healed yet, he was considering declining. Maria asked if Prince Carlos would be present, learning that he would be attending. She remembered that in the original story, the conflict with Prince Carlos led Alfred down a dark path. There had also been an unpleasant argument between the children at the last ball. This situation couldn't continue, so Maria expressed her desire to attend the tea party. Watching Alfred and Milio fencing, she thought about how much stronger the child had become since then. She hoped the children would have another opportunity to build a friendship. Alfred noticed her gaze and gave her a questioning look. Soon the appointed day arrived, and they prepared to depart. Zahar gazed at the terrace bathed in sunlight. He recalled Maria's bright smile as she sat there. Zahar didn't understand what kind of feelings these memories evoked in him. Milio entered, reporting that the carriage was ready and it was time to leave. Milio exchanged a glance with the Duke's butler. Experienced servants could always perceive their master's mood. The Brown family, dressed in magnificent court attire, entered the palace. The surrounding decorations were so captivating that Maria and Alfred couldn't help but marvel. Alfred marveled at the beautiful flowers everywhere. A young man with long black hair approached, inquiring about Zahar's well-being. He shook hands with Zahar. They were clearly acquainted, just hadn't seen each other in a while. A little girl stood beside the stranger. The stranger bowed to Maria and introduced himself as Count Nova. Maria was pleased to make a new acquaintance. The girl beside the Count was very beautiful, with bright green eyes and long hair, wearing a soft blue dress with many ruffles. The Count said this was his daughter, Anna. The girl stepped out from behind her father, holding a large book in one hand, and gracefully curtsied. "Allow me to introduce myself," the girl said. "I am Anna Nova." Maria was completely charmed. The girl had completely captivated her. Alfred was also looking at Anna, looking noticeably shy. Zahar prompted his son to greet her as well. Alfred walked up to Anna, awkwardly bowed, and introduced himself. Anna smiled brightly. Alfred also had a book with him, and he showed Anna the cover, which depicted a princess wearing a crown. He thought Anna resembled the princess. Count Nova mentioned that the children were of similar age and hoped they would get along well. Maria leaned down and told Alfred that he could finally play with Anna. The adults were summoned by His Majesty, so they headed to the meeting hall. In the grand hall, tables were set for the guests. A group of Maria's friends had already surrounded her, eager to know everything about the silverware and jewelry. They had all heard that Lady Maria was the brains behind these products, praising her for being both intelligent and beautiful, constantly coaxing her to reveal all her secrets. Maria laughed modestly, saying it was no big deal. She really wanted to escape the endless compliments and was anxiously waiting for Zahar to return. Finally, she excused herself under the pretense of needing to check on her son, which was the perfect escape from the chattering group of girls. Maria rushed out of the hall and leaned against the door, sighing in relief. Wiping her forehead, she noticed Alfred and Anna sitting on a bench together, reading a book, both engrossed in it. Alfred pointed to an illustration of a princess in the book and said Anna looked just like her. The comment left both children slightly bewildered. Maria thought tenderly that this girl might be Alfred's first love. Just then, Prince Carlos walked over and, upon seeing Anna, said he had been looking for her. Carlos looked rather haughty as he glanced at Alfred. Anna asked the prince what was the matter. Carlos said he wanted to take Anna to see his horses. Anna smiled and asked if Alfred could come along too. Alfred was quite surprised when the girl asked him if he wanted to see the horses. Alfred also asked the prince if he could join them. Carlos was clearly annoyed, but Anna gave him such a sorrowful look that the prince had to agree to the request. Both Alfred and Anna were delighted, smiling in anticipation of spending more time together. Prince Carlos also noticed this budding friendship. He had been looking forward to seeing Anna and now felt irritated. Maria wondered if everything was all right with the children, but remembering how much she hated it when her father interfered too much, she decided she shouldn't constantly intervene in their conflicts. Interfering in children's first love was even more impolite, so Maria returned to the hall. The three children walked toward the groom, who was holding two horses. The prince said that both horses were his. Both horses were beautiful, one pure white and the other jet black. Alfred and Anna were mesmerized by the animals. Alfred tried to approach the black horse, but the animal shook its head irritably. Anna laughed, while Carlos watched thoughtfully, looking displeased. Alfred was clearly intimidated by the black horse's behavior. A smile spread across Carlos's face. He had a plan. With that smile, the prince turned to Alfred, folding his arms. Carlos offered Alfred the black horse to ride. The prince declared it was the royal steed of honor, and Alfred had no choice but to agree. Alfred looked scared. The prince thought smugly that this coward surely wouldn't be able to handle the fiery horse and would definitely make a fool of himself in front of Anna. Servants helped the prince onto the white horse, and Carlos said that Anna would ride with him. The girl agreed and was soon seated behind the prince. While things weren't going so well for Alfred, the black horse was clearly unhappy about something. As soon as the boy settled into the saddle, the horse began to buck wildly, trying to throw him off. Alfred clung to the horse's neck with both hands to avoid falling, crying out for help. Anna was very worried, but Prince Carlos was thoroughly enjoying the sight of his rival's panic. The servants pulled Alfred off the horse. They asked the boy if he was hurt. Alfred read the mind of the groom who helped him. He realized that the black horse got grumpy when it was hungry, and it hadn't been fed its carrots today. Alfred spotted some carrots in one of the servants' bags. The black horse continued to act up, trying to bite the person holding its reins. The horse knocked the man down, completely out of control, and charged towards the white horse where Anna and Carlos were seated. Alfred watched the scene anxiously. Anna hid her face behind the prince in fear. Carlos yelled at the horse, trying to stop it from approaching. Alfred took a carrot from the bag and held it out towards the black horse. It caught the horse's attention. Alfred, with great determination, began to call to the horse. The horse turned towards him, its expression still frightening. The horse neighed loudly, reared up, and then happily took the carrot from Alfred's hand. Anna and Carlos stared at Alfred in amazement. As the servants helped the children dismount, the boy was already stroking the horse's face, saying it was just hungry. Anna ran to Alfred, thanking him for saving them. Alfred felt embarrassed. Anna enthusiastically shook his hand, repeatedly saying how brave he was. Carlos came over too, claiming it was just a fluke, saying Alfred had clearly been scared before. Anna mentioned that the prince had been afraid before, but he didn't want to recall it. She asked why he didn't thank Alfred first, and Carlos angrily replied that he should be the one giving thanks. Alfred said it was all right and that they could play together later, extending his hand for a handshake. Anna, excited, clapped her hands and declared it a friendship handshake. The prince scoffed, saying he'd reluctantly accept it this time, and shook Alfred's hand. Alfred beamed. Anna was pleased with how things turned out, but Prince Carlos felt awkward. While he accepted the situation, he still very much disliked it. Afterwards, Alfred excitedly recounted everything to his father and Maria, his eyes sparkling. The best part for Alfred was Anna saying he was brave. He concluded by saying that was how he became friends with Prince Carlos. Maria patted his head, saying he was a clever child, and that it seemed the boys' relationship had truly improved. Wang Hai inquired about Zahar's conversation with the Marquis. The Duke admitted he'd received a report about declining tin production and needed to urgently inspect the mines. Maria was worried by this news. She found it strange, as not much time had passed, especially since it involved her father, which meant something must be wrong. Wang Hai said, since it concerned her family, he would go too. Alfred immediately volunteered to join them, and so the whole family went to the mines. Daniel was already waiting for them. He thanked the Duke for visiting, while Zahar apologized for the sudden arrival. Daniel was about to lead the guest away when they were immediately met by a group of hostile workers. Zahar, confused, looked inquiringly at Daniel. A worker rudely asked what the official was doing there. Zahar explained he'd received a report about the drop in production. The workers grew loud and angry, accusing Zahar of lying, saying he just wanted them to work harder and demanded fair wages. Zahar tried to explain he paid everyone handsomely, but before he could finish, the angry workers shouted that they were always forced to do more work for less pay, that the nobles kept all the profits, and that the state was responsible, enjoying their suffering. Maria looked at the crowd of workers, completely bewildered. Zahar tried to quell the unrest, raising his voice to demand calm. A worker threw his shovel onto a pile of dirt, declaring that since things had come to this, he quit. Others followed suit, while Daniel yelled at them futilely, trying to understand what had suddenly happened, but received no explanation. He started calling for them to come back. Wang Hai held a frightened Alfred close. Zahar looked thoughtful as they returned to the Dane residence. Zahar strode purposefully towards the head of the house's office. Marquis Dane looked up from his papers and asked why his guest had entered without knocking. Zahar demanded to see the employee wage distribution report, but the Marquis retorted that the strike was Zahar's fault. The Marquis turned back to his papers, saying Zahar should apologize first. Maria rushed to her father's office door, feeling she was there out of concern for Zahar, but it was too late to enter. The Duke claimed the problem was that Mr. Dane paid the miners too little, but Maria's father believed the wages were sufficient. While the domestic tin industry was growing, government aid remained the same, and more funds were needed for further expansion, which the Marquis was expecting a timely response to. But the Marquis said there was another option. All profits from the tin industry would go to the Dane family. Zahar stared at the man, momentarily speechless. He exclaimed that tin was state-owned property and couldn't possibly belong entirely to one family. The Marquis sneered, saying that in that case, mining would have to cease, as cooperation with Zahar wouldn't work, and he intended to write to the king about it. Zahar stared at him, struggling to control his words and emotions. He said he understood the Marquis's meaning and, apologizing again, turned to leave, letting his opponent savor the victory. Maria and Alfred waited outside the door, but they didn't dare ask anything. Wang Hai silently watched the Duke walk down the corridor, extremely anxious and unsure what to do, as at this rate, all the problems of the mine would be blamed on Zahar. Wang Hai recognized this as a sinister plot by the Dane family and was trying to figure out how to stop it from happening. Alfred held Maria's hand, hearing her trying to think of a solution. The boy realized his father was in danger, which meant he had to act too. Alfred looked at his palms, the sudden thought that his ability might help his mother. "Leave it to me," Alfred said. Maria couldn't stop him. The boy rushed into Marquis Dane's office. Alfred was determined to save his father. The boy walked up to Marquis Dane's desk and addressed him as grandfather. The Marquis asked him what he wanted. Alfred didn't answer, just waved his hands as if asking for something. The Marquis chuckled, taking the boy onto his lap, saying he was spoiled. Alfred could hear the man's thoughts, and they frightened him. He knew he wasn't liked at all in the old man's eyes. Even disliked, it seemed. The boy was terrified, but he knew it was all for his father. With a cheerful smile, Alfred reached for the documents on the table, asking his grandfather what they were. Marquis Dane tried to stop the boy from touching his things without permission, thinking it best to keep the mining documents away, even from a child. Alfred guessed these mining documents must be important. Marquis Dane believed if he could hide these documents well, Zahar wouldn't stand a chance. The miners were doing a great job. Now he just needed to report everything to the king. With a malicious smile, Marquis Dane imagined how Zahar's credibility would be destroyed. Alfred realized this man was the cause of all the trouble. The boy reached for the table, determined to get those documents for his father. Alfred grabbed a notebook from the table and ran, ignoring the Marquis's angry shouts. The Marquis wondered where the boy had run off to with his documents. Alfred was truly scared. He shouted that he liked the notebook, so he was keeping it. Marquis Dane was furious, because if Zahar saw these records, he would immediately know where the money had gone. Alfred rushed out of the office, notebook in his arms, with Maria standing at the door. Marquis Dane yelled at his daughter to catch the boy. Maria had no intention of doing so, putting her hands behind her back, smiling as she said she accidentally let Alfred slip away. Marquis Dane, furious, told his daughter not to play dumb and to go after Alfred. Maria chased after him, calling out Alfred's name. Alfred, looking back and seeing Maria, didn't stop immediately. They ran to a place where no one could see them. Then Alfred handed the notebook to Maria. He told her it contained records about the money in the mines. Maria realized it was her father's secret ledger, and Alfred added that Marquis Dane was also orchestrating the strike. Maria gasped, unable to believe he would go that far. Just then, the old man finally found his daughter and stepson's hiding place and was knocking on the door, demanding his notebook back. A wave of anger washed over Maria. She opened the door and told her father that she caught Alfred, but he didn't have any notebook on him. The boy said he'd lost it accidentally, and Marquis Dane flew into a rage. The Marquis yelled at the servants to find the notebook at all costs, but it was actually in Maria's hands. Maria said she would discipline Alfred properly later. Meanwhile, the servants were running around like headless chickens, the Marquis's angry shouts only adding to the chaos. Maria gently placed her hand on Alfred's shoulder and smiled at him. She thought to herself that Alfred did a good job and wanted him to know her thoughts. Alfred's frightened expression changed to curiosity as Maria gave him a bright smile. Soon they were both laughing happily. Maria felt relieved because with this notebook, she could expose all of her father's wrongdoings. She couldn't say it out loud, but she wanted Alfred to share her joy, so she telepathically conveyed it to him. Just then, Zahar walked over and asked his wife what was going on. Maria told him the Marquis had lost something and everyone was looking for it. Zahar mentioned he was about to meet the leader of the miners, and both Maria and Alfred wanted to go with Zahar. The Duke didn't object. Maria thought they could use this notebook as evidence to end the strike. As they sat in the carriage, she handed the notebook to her husband, explaining that it was the ledger related to the mines that her father had hidden. Zahar opened the notebook and began to read. Many things were starting to make sense now. When they arrived at the mines, they saw a group of workers resting by a fire. The Duke and Duchess walked towards them. Alfred walked with his parents, Maria's hand on his shoulder. One of the workers turned around and, seeing the Duke, exclaimed that he was back again. Zahar asked the men if they could spare a moment, as he wanted to discuss the recent events with them. They rudely replied that there was nothing to discuss and told him to get lost. Zahar responded that he would speak his piece right there and then, and announced that the recent strike was funded by the head of the Dawn family. One of the workers turned to the Duke, rose from the ground, and said that he was willing to listen to what the Duke had to say and invited the guests to follow him. They came to a house in the miners' settlement. The worker opened the door, and they saw 3 children playing on the floor and a sick person lying in bed. A girl called the worker Dad and greeted him. A boy asked who these people were. The worker explained that they were guests and he needed to talk to them, and it would be best for the children to go outside and play. Maria, Zahar, and Alfred entered the house. Maria looked around with a sad expression. They sat at a table in the single room. The worker asked Zahar what the matter was. The Duke decided to get straight to the point and asked the worker to stop the strike. The worker replied that he couldn't do that because, as the Duke knew, the head of the Dawn family had already paid for the strike and promised more if the plan succeeded. The worker thought that although life had always been hard, he had made a foolish decision, and now, confronting the nobles, he would certainly not escape punishment. He just wanted to protect his family. Alfred, reading the man's thoughts, was greatly saddened by what he learned. He asked his father to forgive the man and explained that the worker did it all for his family. The worker was surprised that the unfamiliar child knew what he was thinking. Maria said she understood the responsibility and feelings for one's family. She sighed that if things continued this way, everyone would suffer in the end, and asked him to tell her what happened. The man explained that working in the mines was always dangerous, and most people here didn't live past 30. That's why the worker wanted to leave some money for his family. Maria asked if that was the reason he obeyed Marquis Dawn's orders. The man knew that if he disobeyed the Marquis, his family would be in danger. He slammed his fist on the table and said that he couldn't turn back now, not even for the friends who trusted him and followed him. Zahar asked why they couldn't approach the government together to represent the miners' interests and fight for their wages. The worker looked at the Duke in surprise. He explained that since the workload in the mines had increased, the government should pay appropriate special allowances. The worker asked if the Duke was really willing to confront the state for their sake. Zahar replied that mining was a source of wealth for both the people and the state, and he bore responsibility for it. They returned to the other workers, where their leader could now announce that they would receive benefits directly from the government. The people were excited that the strike was over. Alfred was very happy and proud of himself. Marquis Dawn, arriving at the mine, suddenly shouted, wanting to know what was going on. The Marquis approached Zahar. He demanded an explanation, but Zahar, instead of explaining, showed him a notebook, turning to the correct page. Zahar said it was a mining ledger, showing how Marquis Dawn used the money the state allocated for the workers' wages. The Marquis was speechless. He fell to his knees, looking completely distraught. Zahar said he would make sure the Marquis received the punishment he deserved. The summoned law enforcement officers were already arresting the criminal. Alfred, with a joyful smile, caught up with his father. Zahar stopped and gently stroked his son's hair. He said the boy had really helped him a lot. Alfred was surprised because his father rarely praised him like that. Tears of joy welled up in the boy's eyes. Maria looked at the scene with satisfaction. Sitting in the carriage, she remembered all the hardships, but was happy to see the father-son relationship become closer. Zahar looked at his son with pride. Alfred seemed happy with the praise he received. Suddenly, a church spire outside the window caught the boy's attention. He asked his father if that was the church where his mother's grave was. Maria asked if it was true, and Zahar confirmed it. Maria felt that her companion wanted to visit Lady Flora's grave and suggested they go there now. Zahar looked carefully at his son and agreed to visit the cemetery. Alfred was happy about this. Suddenly, a certain thought made the boy anxious. Maria looked at her son with a smile, trying to figure out what was bothering him. Alfred thought of Flora and Maria, both of whom he called mother. They arrived at the church together. They walked to Flora's grave, and Maria placed a beautiful bouquet of flowers on the tombstone. She looked thoughtfully at the tombstone. Maria wished she had known the woman sooner. In her heart, she told Flora what a good child Alfred was and how he was thriving. She also asked Flora to watch over them from heaven. Flora's soul was indeed watching over the 3 people who had come to her grave. "Thank you for taking care of him," Flora said, opening her arms. Maria stared at her in surprise. It was as if she could see the memories Flora was sharing with her, seeing baby Alfred in his mother's arms. She watched him grow, watched his mother call him her treasure. Flora said that as long as her child wasn't doing well without her, she wanted to stay by his side. Watching Flora's memories, tears streamed down Maria's face. Flora embraced her, saying she was glad Maria had become Alfred's new mother and asked her to take good care of him. Alfred looked at Maria. He didn't see the scene that existed only in her mind, only noticing that Maria was crying. Alfred approached and took her hand. In her heart, Maria thanked Lady Flora and promised to always be there for Alfred. Alfred stared intently at Maria, who quickly wiped away her tears. He asked if this meant he had 2 mothers now. Maria didn't know how to answer the question. Alfred, delighted, said he was really happy and hugged Maria tightly, saying they were both his precious treasures. Tears streamed down the woman's cheeks as she looked at her son, leaned down to thank him, and hugged him tightly. Zahar watched his wife and son, not understanding what had happened, then smiled and said it was time to go back. They turned to leave the graveyard. Zahar thought he heard Flora's voice say that he had become gentler. Zahar turned around, unsure himself what he hoped to see, but there was nothing there but rows of tombstones. Zahar smiled, thinking it must have been his imagination, and they left together. The carriage took the Duke Brown's family home. Maria looked at the silent Zahar. Alfred looked at his mother and said he had a request. Life in the castle continued peacefully and quietly. Zahar and Alfred were sitting at a neatly arranged table for 2 in the garden when Alfred heard someone calling him. Maria came over with a bright smile, carrying a large plate of cookies. She placed the plate in front of Alfred and told him they were freshly baked and for him to try. Alfred's eyes lit up. "Thank you, Mother," he said. Maria thought to herself that she wouldn't have guessed this was exactly what the boy wanted to request. It turned out the boy had brought a recipe and asked her to make these specific cookies. Maria guessed that Alfred must have missed this taste that reminded him of Lady Flora. Alfred took a bite of the cookie and cried out, his face wrinkled. Maria rushed to her son with concern, but the child simply didn't like the taste. Zahar also tried one, and Maria took a bite herself, finding the cookies exceptionally salty. It seemed the salt and sugar had been mixed up during baking. Maria was frustrated and embarrassed by the failure. She apologized and promised to try baking them again, surprised she had made such a basic mistake. Zahar smiled and said not to worry, that they were fine this way. At least they had tried salty cookies. Maria listened to these words in disbelief, looking up at her husband awkwardly. Zahar gave a bright smile and told her she was fine just the way she was. Maria was surprised by his words and asked the Duke why he would suddenly say such a thing, but he just smiled without answering. She didn't know that at this moment, Zahar was thinking about Flora's words telling him to be gentler. The family tea party continued. Maria found it strange. When she was reborn, she couldn't make a sound and thought she would be killed like in the original story. She remembered the pinky promise she and Alfred made as children, the memory of her holding the boy tightly in her arms. The image of Alfred rushing out to protect her from the bandits flashed before her eyes. The child had really helped her a lot. They had gone through all of this together. Maria hadn't even noticed how she had truly come to love the boy. They had been through a lot and were becoming more and more like a real family. Next time, I'll definitely get it right, Maria thought as she bit into another salty cookie. After the bright day, night fell. Maria was getting ready for bed when she heard a knock on the door. Alfred stood at the doorway, saying he had a nightmare and asking if he could sleep here. He dreamt that when he grew up, he killed Maria and his father. The woman felt she had seen a sign of death. She couldn't believe such a terrible omen. She had to dispel this ominous dream at all costs. Maria held out her hand to the boy and said of course they could sleep together. Seeing Alfred cheer with delight, she smiled. She hadn't expected Zahar to appear at the door. Alfred turned to him and said that Maria had agreed. The three of them got into bed, but Maria couldn't close her eyes, trying to understand how this had happened. She turned to the Duke, surprised to see him there as well. Zahar looked in her eyes. He cleared his throat and replied that he had also been afraid to sleep alone as a child. Maria looked at him in surprise and couldn't help but laugh. Zahar asked her if she was laughing at him. Alfred opened his eyes and looked at her. He said he liked seeing his parents laugh. Maria reached out and gently stroked her son's hair. She thought that seeing his happy smile made her the happiest person in the world, happier than anyone else. Alfred smiled happily. Zahar gazed silently ahead. He heard Alfred call the mom and dad. The brightly smiling boy held Maria's hand and placed his other hand in Zahar's, saying that from now on, they should always sleep together like this. Maria didn't know what to say, but Zahar said it was all right once in a while. Maria felt incredibly awkward about the whole situation, but Alfred just laughed it off. She looked at her happy son. She thought that no matter what happened next, she hoped they could continue to live together harmoniously like this. Maria would never let Alfred become a bad person.